Okay, and before we start in earnest on the agenda tonight, I wanted to just announce up front that we are likely not to be voting permanently on a couple of the ordinance public hearings tonight. So one is on the affordable housing ordinance 2019-10. You'll see here it's also listed. Oh, your microphone. Oh, all right. Can you hear me now? It's on. It wasn't going in the microphone. There's something we can twist here.
Hello.
It's just low.
Is this better?
Gotta turn it up. No.
These. It's that one.
Is this is working now too? Okay, excellent. I will start over again then. So for the, I just wanted to announce up front that there might be some of the ordinance public hearings some folks are here for tonight. We welcome you to stay if you would like to and testify, but just so people know up front, there was an issue with some of the noticing for ordinance 2019-10 and also some proposed changes from the planning board. So council will likely be voting tonight on an amendment to that ordinance, which is essentially acts as a reintroduction. I'm looking at Trishka to make sure I'm saying this correctly, and that will trigger another public hearing at a future meeting. And there has also been a bit of data collected for ordinance 2019-2, which is the FAR ordinance. We will have a discussion about that tonight, which again, people are welcome to stay for that, but there's a good chance that council will be tabling that ordinance tonight as well. So I just want to let people know that if you don't want to stay the whole time, you're welcome to leave and there'll be another chance to speak on this as well. So with that, we'll move to approval of the minutes, and we have the minutes from March 11, 2019, the closed session and also the open session. Is there a motion to approve both sets of minutes?
I'll move.
Moved by Ms. Krummeler.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any comments or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved, and now we come to announcements, and I'll start on my right with Ms. Niedergang. Do you have any announcements this evening?
I do have an announcement, which I'm going to find right this minute. Sorry about that.
We can come back to you if you want.
No, I got it. Two things from the Environmental Commission. One, really a Sustainable Princeton event, which is that Sustainable Princeton's Green Fest will be held on Saturday, May 11th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the courtyard of the Princeton Shopping Center. Sustainable Princeton invites the community to join them for an afternoon of engaging entertainment and education on living a more sustainable lifestyle. Events include opportunities to test drive a variety of electric vehicles, enjoy live animals and live music and entertainment, and learn about Princeton's Climate Action Plan. Another event through the Environmental Commission is on Saturday, May 4th from 10 to 12 a.m. at Mountain Lakes House, which is on ways to address food waste. So that will include using chickens, worms, and compost. And then also I have one announcement from public transit. Just a reminder that the Dinky reopening will be on Friday, May 24th, and we're in the process of planning some event to celebrate that. And also finally from Shade Tree, that Communiversity is just a month away now, and that Shade Tree Commission members will be giving away seedlings to residents, so all native planting. So if you're interested in that, you can show up and get a tree or two to take home. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Crump?
Just quickly to tag on to Eve's announcement about the Green Fest on May 11th. That's actually also being paired with this year's Ciclovia, which is going to be a school-oriented event at JW, at John Witherspoon. I believe it's from 9 to 12 on May 11th, and will culminate in a trek over to the shopping center to participate in the Green Fest.
Great, thank you. Any announcements? Nope. Mr. Quinn?
Just point out that there's a free rabies clinic on Saturday from 10 to noon at the fire department across the street. So bring your pooches. I'll be bringing my dog to the clinic. And also there was a reminder in the mayor's newsletter that if your dog doesn't have a license, that the rabies clinic is the first step, and please license your four-legged friends. Thank you.
Oh, excuse me, is that cats also or just dogs?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Cats too.
A Princeton
Cats
for
as
all.
well.
Oh, it is cats and dogs.
Yeah.
A Princeton for all.
For the rabies, it's cats and dogs, but no licensor,
Dogs
no
must-
licenses for cats yet.
Dogs must be on a leash and controlled by a responsible adult, and cats must be in a carrier or a pillowcase. I'm reading straight from the health department's listing.
Thank you.
I think we should move on. Ms. Braga, how do you top that? Do you have any announcements?
Can I just make a point on that?
Does our health officer have a
Specifically for
correction?
kittens.
Begs
because they're more
clarification.
comfortable. That's based upon what the animal control officer tells us. However, whatever they're comfortable in is fine.
So I can't top that. No reports.
I have two quick announcements. That's a tough act to follow, but our award-winning Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance is hosting Hidden in Plain Sight on Tuesday, April 9th from 7 to 9 p.m. at John Witherspoon Middle School. Essentially, it's an event where we'll have Tim McMahon, who's an experienced DEA agent, and they will show you how some of our younger folks hide their illegal substances. So just a great way for us to tackle issues such as drug abuse. The second and last announcement is Corner House is hosting the Star Spangled Banner event on Friday, May 3rd from 6 p.m. to 10:30 at the Mercer County Boathouse. We will be honoring our most previous council person, or one of the two most previous council people, Lance Liverman, and proceeds will benefit Corner House's behavioral health and prevention and treatment programs. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have a few announcements. The first is I want to thank Mr. Grosser for the health department's work on Princeton being named a Mayor's Wellness Healthy Town. And I think we're yes, yay. And it's also thank you to all of our community partners for that. And then council is going to be meeting every Monday in April, just so folks have it on their calendars. So on April 1st, we're going to be having a special meeting in the other building in Monument Hall on transportation issues. And that will be at, the regular meeting there starts at 7:30. We're asking the board and commission folks to show up at 7 for more of a meet and greet. That's April 1st. April 7th, we have our regular meeting. April 15th, we'll have our special parking issues meeting. April 22nd, we have our regular council meeting. And then on April 29th, that's a tentative date, I think, at this point, but we're hoping to have a meeting on the food waste initiative and giving folks an update on where we are with that. And hopefully we'll have some exciting news to announce either then or in the days leading up to that. And that, Eve, did you mention the stream cleanup?
I did not mention. I am so embarrassed.
No, that's okay. So I have the information right in front of me.
May I?
Yeah,
I'm going to be working there. So Good that you mention it, Mayor. The Environmental Commission and the Watershed Institute is hosting Princeton Stream Cleanup, which will be on Saturday, April 6th. I will be one of the Watershed staff members there to explain what to do. We have great T-shirts. And that's from 9 to 11 in Grover Park. So there's plenty of parking at the shopping center, and hope that you will turn out.
Excellent, thank you.
Mayor, the regular meeting is April 8th, not the 7th.
Oh, you're right, thank you. April 8th, all Mondays. Are there any staff announcements? Nope, okay. Then we'll move on to comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda, and we'll start with the sign-up list, and then we'll open it up to anybody else who'd like to speak. So it looks like some of these are for ordinances, so I'll ask that you wait till we get to the public hearing for those. And then we have a couple of comments on the fueling station, which we can hear now if they're not related to the ordinance. So first would be Huck Fairman.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I've lived on Mount Lucas Road, which I live on now, for a long time. I went to Valley Road.
You don't want the mic or just hold your hand.
Good, thanks. As I was saying, that I've lived on Mount Lucas Road for a long time. I went to Valley Road School. I understand that change happens in the town. It's changed quite a bit since I went to school here, but I was frankly shocked by the to learn without any information given by the town about this fueling station and frankly also the first aid station. Mount Lucas Road, Terhune, Laurel Road, they're all essentially residential areas. We feel that the traffic, the noise, and the change in traffic route by closing Terhune, the connection to 206, is going to make the traffic problem even worse than it is now, particularly at rush hour. It's going to be more dangerous. There are a lot of kids, young kids who live on Laurel and along Mount Lucas Road. They go to school, they ride bikes, so I don't think this is a great improvement for their safety. I would hope that I also understand that SPRAB ruled against the fueling station, and I don't understand why the town or the board went ahead and overrode their objections. So I would hope that the Exxon-looking fueling station that it seems to be arising there will be moved to somewhere else. And frankly, I would also welcome the move of the first aid station, although I don't anticipate that happening. But I just want to express my shock at the whole procedure and the outcome. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to be talking more about that when we get to the ordinance that's on the agenda. So if your comments pertain more to the ordinance, I'd ask that you wait till we get to the public hearing, or if it's not pertaining to what's on the agenda, you can speak now. Next person is Dunbar Bernie, so I just ask for your judgment if you want to speak now or if you want to speak as part of the public hearing.
Why don't I wait?
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. So is there anybody else who'd like to speak on something that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we'll close public hearing and we'll move to reports. And I'll start again on my right with Ms. Niedergang with any reports for this evening.
Just following up a little bit on what Councilman Quinn said about dog licensure, just to stress that the health department is really focusing on getting dogs in the community licensed. We have about 1,000 dogs that are licensed, and the estimate is that we have about 4,000 in the community, so that's a big discrepancy. We'd like to do this both in terms of health, making sure all dogs have their shots, and also if a dog is lost, yet it's licensed, it's much easier for our animal control officer to return the dog to their usually very grateful owners. So it's something I just want to stress.
Ms. Crum?
I have a few reports. First, I wanted to report a little bit on the work that has been going on around the ordinance 2019-2, the proportional FAR bonus ordinance. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but just want to assure people, Councilman Quinn and I, staff, and also some engaged citizens have been working really hard over the last month gathering information to help make a real data-driven decision. We've gotten information on all the teardowns over the last 6 years, how many of them were on undersized lots, how many of those utilized the proportional FAR bonus in the construction of the new homes that were built on the lots. We're still looking for information on additions that have been done in the same time period, and how many of those were on undersized lots and how many of them utilized the proportional FAR bonus. We're also in conversation with the tax assessor to try to fully understand how he views the sales of those properties when working on the compliance plan. So if you think there are any other pieces of information we should be considering in whether or not finally to act on this ordinance, please feel free to email me or Mr. Quinn. I'll be happy to hear from you. My second report is on the Climate Action Plan. Sustainable Princeton has held several meetings this month, gathering the various expert task forces and the steering committee to finalize a first draft of Princeton's Climate Action Plan. The draft will be made public at the beginning of April with online tools to facilitate public comment. The comment period will last for 2 months, after which the working groups will reconvene to review and incorporate suggestions where appropriate, after which a final draft will be presented to council for our endorsement. I wanted to also report briefly on the AH3 zone ordinance, which we are also going to talk about a little bit more later on this evening, but just wanted to give a report sort of in my role as planning board liaison from council that the planning board at their meeting of March 21st reviewed ordinance 2019-10 as introduced at our last council meeting. Several changes were suggested to make the language more consistent with current affordable housing regulations and enforcement protocols in New Jersey, and also to increase design flexibility and strengthen sustainability guidelines. The developer was present, did not object to any of the proposed language, and has been working with his architect to create a more responsive design, reducing impervious coverage on site and addressing other suggestions from the board. We'll hear more about the proposed changes when we reach item 12-.3 on the agenda. And then finally, I wanted to give a report on the Princeton Theological Seminary redevelopment plan. On Friday the 22nd, March 22nd, the ad hoc committee met to review the outcomes from the charrette process held the previous week. The committee concluded on the recommendation of Jim Constantine, the planner who's been helping us through the process. We concluded that the conceptual plan needs additional work and that both LRK and the seminary's architect will continue to work to respond to community concerns. There has been some pressure from the historic preservation advocates in particular to reduce the density of the site. However, LRK felt it made sense to continue to massage the plan with the full program before asking the seminary to reconsider their needs. On a side note, Gail Ullman, chair of the ad hoc committee, has retired from the planning board, and I have been asked to step in as chair of the ad hoc committee for the remainder of the planning process.
Ms. Ross? Ms. Quinn?
When is Gail's retirement effective?
Basically tonight, because we have an appointment for her replacement on the planning board. Yeah.
Thursday was her last meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a big loss for the planning board. I know.
Okay.
It's-
I truly enjoyed my tenure on the planning board, and
Yeah.
Gail was the leader the entire time. So
Yeah.
so
Did you have any
big loss.
reports? Okay. Did you have any reports?
Oh, no reports from me.
Okay. I had couple reports. The first one is a question for my colleagues. So there's a group called the International Code Council, and they're responsible for the building codes. I'm sure Mr. Cohen is familiar with them. We're part of a group called the Climate Mayors, and they are recommending that municipalities become members of this International Code Council so that we will have a vote when they decide on what sort of energy efficiency standards they're going to build into the code, which is a challenge we've had here locally, because if it's not part of the state regulations, it makes it difficult for us to require people to do certain things without giving them something like a density bonus. And it would be better if it were built into the regulations. So it costs $135 to join. And I just wanted to get the sense of council if that was something people would be supportive of doing, so that we could add our voice to this vote at this time. Okay, all right. I'll give you the
I'm
information.
supportive, but I caution that to actually have real influence, as with anything else, it's going to take a lot more than a membership to make change. So.
Well, and that's the other question too, is it worth it or not then?
I think it's worth it, especially if the mayor's group will have action alerts, things that they will help us take action on to help make a difference. You know, if we're trying to do it ourselves,
Right.
it's too much.
Right,
But
no, it sounds like there are groups that are paying attention and who are trying to influence the process this time. Okay, so it sounds like there's general consensus to do that. Okay, great. And then the other announcement, David already did this, but I do want to say that I think the charrette process that was used by the planning board in the seminary redevelopment process was a really amazing process for this town. Everybody who was involved thought it was, I mean, if we have the time and energy and money to do it, we should really try to incorporate this into our planning process moving forward. It's been, we're still not at the end yet, but I think it is a great example of how to do planning. Are there any staff reports? Nope. Okay. Then we'll move on to correspondence. And Ms. Stockton, do you want to talk about this letter we got from the DOT?
Sure. Good evening. Since about 2015, Princeton has been working with the New Jersey Department of Transportation in relation to the traffic signal at Nassau Street, Washington, and Van Deventer. They had come to us with a proposal to replace the traffic signal at that time, and we requested that they evaluate an all-pedestrian cross phase at that traffic signal when they did the replacement. And at the time, our justification was that in 2007, the borough had worked with the Department of Transportation to do a pedestrian and crosswalk study of the downtown area, and that was one of the recommendations to consider for that intersection. So we put forth that recommendation. It was denied at the time because we had too many pedestrians, and they were concerned about the operation and the movement of vehicles on the state highway. They did make some allowances within that design where they allowed the Washington and Van Deventer traffic to move separately. Previously, they had moved at the same time. And then they also provided for a leading pedestrian interval for the pedestrian crossing of Nassau Street. So this is a proven safety countermeasure according to the Federal Highway Administration. And so we were, as the recipient of the traffic signal, we needed to see how that would work. As we're all aware, in 2016, we also had pedestrians injured on Nassau Street near Palmer Square. That was the two Italians that were visiting. And then in 2017, unfortunately, we had a fatality back at that intersection of Washington, Van Divender, and Nassau Street. So the council, rightly so at the time, had put together a couple of resolutions, or a resolution to the Department of Transportation requesting back in 2017 that they consider an all-pedestrian cross phase at the intersections of Washington, Van Divender, Witherspoon, and University Place. We already have that type of a crossing situation at 206 and 27. So from the standpoint of police, engineering, public works, which comprise our traffic safety committee, it was just replicating a known condition. People know how to work the signal at 206 and 27, and so it would just keep that same repetition of a type of signal to protect pedestrians and to separate them from the moving vehicles on 27 with our downtown. So we didn't have a response, unfortunately, at the time of submitting that resolution in 2017. We followed up in 2018 with some correspondence asking for meetings with the state to discuss an overall complete streets review of Nassau Street from 206 all the way to Harrison Street. We had one meeting with the state where they offered us the jurisdiction of the highway if we would take that over. And then so we again followed up in October of 2018 with another council resolution asking for this all pedestrian cross phase back at those main intersections of the downtown area. So we received a letter back from the state in February of this month, or this year, indicating that they have denied our request for that all pedestrian cross phase. And just to back up a little bit, the idea of the all pedestrian cross phase is it stops traffic in all directions and it allows pedestrians to cross in any direction, whether it's across streets, diagonal, any direction within an intersection. And with our high pedestrian volume that we have in downtown Princeton, the idea is that it's helpful to move the pedestrians in a safe manner. If anybody drives on Washington or Witherspoon and Nassau Street, you'll see at times you only get 2 cars off of Witherspoon Street at the height of a pedestrian time because you have that cross movement on both sides of the intersection on the crosswalks. So I'll just read a short part of the response from the state. They said, the models with the pedestrian-only phase is forcing the traffic signals to run over capacity, increases overall intersection delays, increases queue lengths, and decreases the operation level of service. So this is essentially saying that it would cause more backup and congestion on 27 if we allowed for this pedestrian cross phase. In your agenda packet, I included some excerpts from the Department of Transportation's own Safety Voyager, which will show you what our crash rates are for the last 5 years from 2013 to 2018. Within this, it's a 0.4 mile corridor that we're looking at. And so bike and pedestrian crashes in that corridor were 15 within that 5-year period. And that's really, it's 15 too many, especially if we can do improvements like this, that yes, you may have to slow down traffic a little bit, but the advantage is everybody gets to where they want to go safely. So I wanted to bring this to the attention of council, and I've been speaking to some of my contacts within the Department of Transportation, and I recommend that we go back with another letter to the commissioner and ask that they reconsider in light of the their complete streets policy. And in light of the fact that New Jersey is one of the pedestrian task force states where we have, I think, almost twice the national average for pedestrian crashes and deaths, and just ask that they reconsider this response.
Thank you. And we're also asking for an in-person meeting. And I've been in touch with Dan Benson, who heads the Transportation Committee for the Assembly, and he's supportive of our efforts. The good thing is that the commissioners grew up in Lawrence, so I think is familiar with Nassau Street, and it makes no sense to any of us here. So I think we have to continue the conversation with the DOT with more exasperation potentially, and calling on everybody in town who has any contacts at the state to help make your voices known too, and that just helps us let people know that this is an important issue for Princeton, and we all want to be able to cross the street. We all cross Nassau Street all the time, so we want to do it safely.
I would just add that in addition to not making any sense, it's deeply disturbing that the car circulation is being prioritized in a zone that's clearly and traditionally had a lot of pedestrian traffic, and where we've had 3 fatalities recently. 1 fatality, I'm sorry. Pardon. Thank you for correcting me. But we've had
3 serious accidents.
3 serious accidents. So if there's an appeal process, if I'm looking at Trishka to see what avenues, if we exhaust all of the administrative avenues, are there any other options available to us?
What I've been told repeatedly is that it's community pressure and political pressure. So we would never fully exhaust that. So it's sort of like a call to help us. We're going to go in person and make the case, but it would help them if they hear, I think all of us here have received emails and calls about frustration that the signals on Nassau Street aren't better. With the way it's set up right now, we all experience this. You're in a car, and the only time you can turn is when pedestrians are given the walk signal. So it sets up a conflict. And we're all familiar with this, and it's super dangerous. And I think people at the state need to just recognize the problems they're causing in the town, and it's not just the models on their computer. Yeah.
Maybe for our next meeting, we could draft a resolution. That way we keep it in the forefront.
Sure, I think that would be helpful. And this will also be something that comes before the groups when we meet for the transportation meeting on the 1st.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Deanna. Anybody else on this?
I'm just wondering if it would be worth it. Dan Benson seems to be a good friend of ours, and he chairs the Assembly's Transportation Committee. I wonder if it would be worth it to reach out to Dan or I should say Assemblyman Benson as we consider a possible appeal.
Right, yeah, no, we've been in contact with him.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And the governor's said to be moving into Drumthwacket soon, so maybe we could have him take a little walk with us.
Walking tour.
Okay. So now we come to our ordinance public hearings for this evening, and the first one is Ordinance 2019-2, an ordinance by Princeton eliminating proportional increase in floor area ratio on undersized lots and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, and the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And on the agenda, you'll see there's a link here to the minutes from February 25th, 2019, when we had a public hearing on this ordinance. And I just want to assure everybody that this is a continuation of that public hearing, so any comments that were made on the 25th are part of the record that will be considered as we continue to mull over this ordinance. And I wanted to start by turning it over to Mr. Cohen and Mr. Quinn to the degree you want to. I know you've been doing some research, and then we can open up the public hearing and then bring it back to council. So, Mr. Cohen?
Okay. So one thing that I forgot to mention in my report about this topic is that we did have a meeting on Friday with staff who had prepared a memo talking about other possible ways to skin the cat, if you will, looking at other ways to adjust the zoning ordinance to try to decelerate tear downs, maybe in a more equitable way than this removal of the proportional FAR bonus. I think that it was really unanimously agreed at that meeting that there is no silver bullet, that anything that you can do it's not going to, it's impossible. I'm sorry, it's impossible to sort of both get rid of the disadvantageous tax impacts of having these rapid changes in neighborhood character, and also to preserve the rights, all the rights of the property owners to do whatever they want on their property. They're just sort of incompatible things. But I did want to reassure everybody that we came out of the meeting agreeing that some of the other priorities that critics from the community have been raising, things like rationalizing our current zoning, where we have neighborhoods, entire neighborhoods that don't conform to the zone that they're located in. The lots are all undersized, the houses are all oversized, things like that need to be fixed as well. And so the staff is committed to working on that. It'll be a tandem effort, not part of the adjustment to this particular provision of the proportional FAR bonus, but it's ongoing. And people really appreciate the need to get that stuff fixed.
Great. And before turning over to Mr. Quinn, I just thought I'd take a step back. I know there's a lot of people who've really dove in on this, and then there's maybe other people, just so that you know generally what is going on here. The floor area ratio is essentially a term for how big a house you can build on the property. And what this ordinance does is there's certain zones where there's a minimum lot size. And even though there's a minimum lot size in that zone, there are properties that are smaller, that have a smaller lot size than what's allowed. So what we have under our current ordinance is that if your lot is smaller than what the zone requires, you actually get to build proportionally a bigger house than someone who lives on a lot that is conforming to the zone. And there are different reasonings behind doing that. The original reason was to have some sort of better conformity across the zone. So if you're on a little lot, that you don't end up with a little house next to everybody else who might be on a regular sized lot. But as Mr. Cohen was saying, taking that away can lead to other issues. So we're trying to sort through what the best approach is here. I'll turn it over to Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to thank you, Mayor, for continuing the public hearing on this. I think that a vote in February would have been premature, even though it's been recommended for several years by the zoning board, by our professionals, that we move ahead with this, and it was passed at the planning board. I think that it was wholly appropriate for there to be a pause. I think that this has been a very helpful community dialogue about land use. There are no easy answers on this, but there are bigger conversations that need to be had about how we can incentivize the construction of middle-class housing to supplement our subsidized affordable housing. And just to echo what what Councilman Cohen said, that a bigger zoning overhaul is absolutely necessary before we can, in my opinion, before we can move on to looking at accessory structures and multi-unit conversions. I know that that's a council goal for the second half of the year. I'd also like to give a shout out to Mr. Carney, who I think is here, who's done quite a lot of data analysis and provided us with a very helpful Google Maps so we could see data on how many lots are fit into this non-complying lots. So I think it's very helpful, and Councilman Cohen also pointed out that the tax impacts is something that I'm personally very interested in. It's a lot more nuanced than I originally thought, and we are starting a conversation with the tax assessor so that we can get some sort of clear sense of what happens in neighborhoods where the FAR bonus is used, both for additions and for new construction, what the tax impacts are for people who are happy with their houses and don't want to do additions. So again, I think it's a good conversation for our community to have if we're to move forward. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
I also really want to thank Charles Carney for his incredibly helpful overlay. Pretty much since the last meeting where this ordinance came up for discussion, I've really gotten an incredible education. Many people have participated in that. So thank you personally to the community, to everyone who sat with me and explained everything or a small bit about proportional FAR. But I just wanted to point out that one of the things that I've learned from both looking at the map that Charles did and other data is there are many, many houses that are either on conforming lots or on non-conforming lots that have substantial ability to be larger, whether or not you include the bonus FAR. And that was, for me, a kind of sobering realization looking at house after house that might be 1,800 square feet, where by right, they have the ability to build a 27 square foot house. And I don't know if we want to do anything about that, or certainly that's a conversation, but that was something I personally was not aware of, was kind of how much unused, I don't know if the right word is capacity, there is that, that could transform a neighborhood overnight without any reference to the proportional FAR bonus. So something just to think about.
Okay. So I'd like to, unless folks have questions about the ordinance, I'd like to open up the public hearing, or to continue the public hearing, and then we'll bring it back to council to decide if we want to take a vote or what the next steps might be.
Well, maybe we should indicate to the public so they know before they speak that I feel like the staff and others are still doing research with options, and so I'd like to continue it. And if that's a sense of the council, it might be helpful for the public to know that before we hear from them.
All right. Yeah, that is my sense of the council, that most people are interested in learning more about this, and also realizing it's part of a larger effort for neighborhood character and what was driving this ordinance. I think there's agreement on the goals, which is to try to get a hold of some of the changes that are happening that seem out of scale and out of place with existing neighborhoods, but to do it in a way that is still supports what people want to do with their homes in terms of needed upkeep and improvements. So that's the goal, and there's many different paths to try to accomplish that. And this was one idea, and I think it's important that we talk about all the ideas. Ultimately, this might not be the idea we go with, but it still might be an important tool that we need in our arsenal. So I think we're still trying to figure that out.
Excuse me, I just wanted to add that I did have expressed reservations last month as far as not feeling comfortable moving forward with the ordinance as written. And I do want to thank the public and also the staff who has been working on investigating various options to address some of the concerns that were voiced. And if it takes more time to get it right, then I would rather we take more time to do so.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say anything at this point? No, okay. All right, so I'm going to open up the public hearing, and there were 2 people who had signed up ahead of time, so we'll start with them and anybody else who would like to speak. And just a reminder that if you spoke at the last meeting, those comments are still part of the record, so you don't need to repeat comments from the last meeting. So first is Mark Stern.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Mark Stern. I live at 44 Southern Way, and I've lived there for 26 years. And my home is on 0.13 acres, and it was built in 1943 or thereabouts. As far as not having people build extensions or make mansions, in our neighborhood, that is the Southern Way and the Western Way neighborhood, that ship has sailed, because I think I'm probably the only house that has not extended. I have the original size house. And all this would do, if you put this through the way it is, it would stop me from maybe making my garage into a bedroom and maybe a full-size bathroom and extending out on my patio to add a few square feet, because the house is about 1,240 right now, and it's the smallest in the neighborhood. And if I added all these things, it would maybe be 1,700 or 1,800, and it would still be the smallest in the neighborhood. Every single house has added some pretty large additions. And the only thing this would do as it stands is reduce my property values. It would not stop cookie-cutter McMansions being built all over Princeton. So I would urge you to put a lot more thought into this before you pass it. Thank you very much.
TJ Elliott.
Good evening. I live at 41 Gulick Road. I've been there since over 16 years now. And the first thing I wanted to say was I wanted to thank the council, as others have here tonight, for advancing this and just for considering this situation. And I think these comments are more general than just the FAR, but they're specifically provoked by that. In that legislation, or in the document containing it there, it talks about furthering the goal of maintaining the existing character of Princeton. And I think that since this was first bruited about, at least in 2015, the number of teardowns that have occurred have affected adversely the character of Princeton. But I don't think it's just specifically or more generally about the character of Princeton. I also think it's about issues that I would talk about as trees, water, and taxes. And so in terms of trees, the number of old growth trees, which have always been the glory of Princeton, that have been destroyed as a result of these tear downs and the building of oversized houses with all of the characteristics that have been talked about in previous meetings here, has been really significant. And that's in every neighborhood. I not only live in Princeton, but I work close by, or have for 17 years at ETS, and so you get a chance to see the orange tape go out, the trees go down, and that effect upon the landscape of Princeton. I know last time it was said that there are water issues that occur, and certainly, as was noted, there are other things going on in our world that cause flooding in our basements. But if you talk to experts who do trenching, what are sometimes called French drains there, and you ask them what the greatest boon to their business is, they will tell you it is tear downs in a particular neighborhood that then cause 2, 3, 4 of the surrounding houses to have water in their basement where they had not had water for 25, 30, 35 years. And I'm sure it's not the intention of anyone to cause that, but I know in our neighborhood it certainly has occurred, and many people who've lived there much longer than I have, who I talked to about this issue, 35, 40, even 50 years there, have talked about that effect. And when it comes to tax issues, one of the reasons why many of us choose to continue to live in Princeton is because of the commitment that Princeton has had and continues to show through the current council and mayor towards affordability. And it's actually been a strange thing to look at with teardowns here, in that in most towns, teardowns have been advantageous for the community. Here we talk about them being disadvantageous. So my final comment would be that, of course, sensible amendments should be considered. And a situation such as described by my fellow Princeton citizen here that seem not to make sense, whatever legislation passed should address that there. But we've waited a long time, and the longer we wait, the more teardowns that there are. And the more teardowns that there are, the more Princeton's character changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then anybody else who would like to speak on this is welcome to come to the mic.
Hello, Joshua Zinder. I'm an architect in town. I'm also a resident. I live on Moore Street. First, I'd like to thank you for not voting on this tonight. I do think this is a mistake. I've expressed my opinion at the last meeting that this was discussed, and I've expressed my opinion to this committee numerous times over the last 4 to 5 years since consolidation, that our town has taken a path of Band-Aid zoning. And each new ordinance has left the council and community scratching their heads wondering why teardowns and other issues still persist. The solution is neighborhood zoning. Our zoning is not scaled to the neighborhoods that we have within our town. If we had zoning that was scaled to our neighborhoods, then you'd be dealing with issues. You would be eliminating one of the biggest issues, meaning a developer would not be interested in putting a 3,000 square foot house in a neighborhood that has 1,200 square foot homes in it, because the zoning would effectively prevent them from doing that. And neighborhood to neighborhood, you would be maintaining the scale and character of those structures. Neighborhood zoning will vastly reduce teardowns. If you change the zoning to be neighborhood zoning, it will eliminate the proportional increase as a matter of fact. So there won't be a need for a proportional increase because the lots in the neighborhood will all fit. And then the concern is, if we don't do this quickly enough, that we're going to still have more teardowns occurring. And I appreciate the research that's been done recently by this committee, and I've done some of my own research, and it's my understanding that you can actually put together a moratorium during this period if you are working towards a specific deadline of establishing new zoning for your community. And the out is that if somebody does want to have a tear down during the moratorium, they would have to apply to zoning and to get their tear down approved. And you'd have to establish a series of criteria, structural, stability, health, welfare, environmental, et cetera. That would be a series of criteria that would allow the zoning board to review, approve, and or reject that tear down. And the solution is neighborhood zoning. We should not be dealing with Band-Aid zoning anymore. We should be looking towards a goal of fixing our zoning since consolidation, and actually fixing it since the 70s, because that's when it was established, and it was wrong then and it's wrong now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey. I agree very much with what Josh just said regarding neighborhood zoning. I want to just mention a couple of things. I don't want to steal David's thunder, but I did my own study of tear downs, not as detailed as his, but I went back to 2012. And there were about 25 tear downs per year scattered around town. They're not all in one concentrated spot. I think that we notice a tear down and we think, oh my God, there's so many tear downs. They're not near as many as we think there are because we just notice them when they do happen. So I think that's one issue to consider. And also, some houses are in really bad shape. The tear down in my neighborhood was in really bad shape. It really couldn't be renovated. It wasn't worth doing anything with it but tear it down. So you need to have an incentive so that somebody comes along and does that. And so you have to keep that in mind. The other thing is that this issue of undersized lots, I think there are a number of undersized lots in my neighborhood. And of course, Witherspoon Jackson, we know all about the undersized lots there. So it's a big issue, and you have to be very careful about what direction you go into because it's a problem that's very pervasive in certain areas of the town, business of undersized lots. The other thing is that in my neighborhood, I think we've had maybe 3 tear downs, and with the 4th one where there's nothing there now, just been torn down. But there have been a lot of houses that have been renovated in all kinds of ways. Additions, almost every house in the neighborhood has been changed by one addition or another. Some have had a second floor added to them. Some have been a gut renovation. Almost all of them have some kind of an addition, some kind of an appendage, because they like the neighborhood. So again, my biggest concern has been the height of the buildings. The issue I have with the tear down in the replacement house that's very near to me on the corner of Tribune and Dempsey, it's very tall. If the house had been set into the ground further, it wouldn't be near as tall. And yet, and it is mounted up slightly, not a lot, but I felt that even so, our staff could have watched that more carefully. But in any event, if the developer had put it more into the ground, I think that it would have changed everything night and day. The big problem with it is the height and the fact that it takes away the sunlight from the neighbor. And I consider that a real taking. I think that's a terrible thing when you live in your house and a house comes along and blocks out some of your sun. And I actually had that experience in my own backyard. A corner of my yard now gets darker earlier because of a house that was wedged in behind. So I think that one has to keep focused on what the problem really is and not try to solve a problem that isn't the problem because you're not really solving the problem. And that sunlight issue to me is so basic. A house without sunshine is an unhappy place. And it's the height that takes away that sunshine. So thanks, and I'm glad you're being so thoughtful about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Christina Corvin, 54 Lee. I commented extensively last time, so you already know my thoughts, and I want to thank the council very much for taking the public's comments into consideration. That's a really nice feeling to live in a town where the council listens to you. I had 2 questions. When and how would the data that you're collecting now be made available to the public? And it sounds like you're leaning towards postponing this vote. And if you do you have a time when you would revisit it? Do you have a date in the future? I guess maybe you haven't talked about that yet, but when things are postponed, how do you approach it when you talk about the future? Thanks very much.
Thanks. So I think we're going to leave that till the end to sort of talk about that as a council in terms of next steps and the timing of next steps. What we'll probably do for something like this where there's been a lot of discussion and I think people are grappling with it is that we probably have some sort of work session where we present the data, and that would be put up on the website just like in a normal agenda. Public could comb through it. There's been already some work that's been done, and we can probably put a section up on our neighborhood character. I think we have a neighborhood character page already on the website, and I'm happy to try to collate that along with Mr. Quinn and Mr. Cohen to try to put that up in a way that will be usable and easy to read for folks. And we can try to do that in the next week or so so people can start looking at it.
I would, if I could just add, and we'll continue the public hearing, I ask you to get with Mr. Carney there, who will raise his hand again, since he's done a lot of work on this and has some info as a quick map that shows non-conforming lots in town. There are 2,211 non-conforming lot areas. It's 41% of our 1 and 2 family lots. And there have been 195 teardowns since 2012 to the end of 2018, and 23% of those rebuilds were on undersized lots. So it's kind of data that is being made available. The tax impact piece will take us a little bit longer, but we are committed to doing a full investigation.
Mia Sachs, Terhune Road. I would just want to echo what Christina said. I know there were a lot of people who didn't come tonight because they thought that the decision would not be made tonight. So I just wanted to have a sense of what will happen going forward, and I want to reiterate the need for some sort of coherent process where everybody knows when they can weigh in, where they can weigh in, and have all of the weigh-ins sort of centrally available for everyone to look at, so that whatever decision is reached, everyone knows why it was reached and how it was reached. And I think that would be the best way to ensure that there's a lot of buy-in for whatever decision is reached. So.
Thank you. And I will say that there's a danger of paralysis by analysis, and we just want to be careful. We have limited staff time, and this is one idea for how to address the larger problem. And so I think council agrees with this, and I think just if the community can sort of bear with us on this, is that this is one idea for how to address a problem we've been talking about. And I don't want to devote all of our resources and all of our time and all of our focus on this one idea, because we're going to end up missing the forest for the trees. So I think we want to put some data out there and see, is this going to have a substantive positive difference? And is it going to be worth some of the negatives we know come with it, or not? But I want to caution us against saying we're going to set up a specific timeline for this one idea, as opposed to this is one idea that's part of a larger project we're working on to preserve the character of the town the best we can with this tool called zoning, which is imperfect at best. So I think we just want to make sure we have the larger picture in mind and make sure that as we have these ideas, we have a process for weighing them. And this might be some of the process where it's not pretty. We throw an idea out there. We get a lot of feedback. We try to collect some more information. And I don't think that we should take this all the way to the end if people are feeling like this is not the best approach, because I think it's a waste of everyone's time and a waste of resources. So I think part of the process is going to be, we're going to collect some more data, we'll throw it out there, we're going to see what council folks feel about it, what we hear from the community. But if we decide there are other ideas out there and we have a whole long list of ideas that we could approach, that we should shift gears.
And I think we can pledge to report at our next meeting how close we've gotten to resolution or making a plan, or if we know the exact plan or meeting date, right?
Right, and we can throw the data that we've collected so far up on the website and get folks' feedback for what we've collected so far. And I think we've already heard in this room, I think the picture is emerging that this affects a percentage of homes, not all homes, obviously, and that it is going to have an impact, but it might also prevent people who live in smaller homes from being able to do those improvements that people on conforming lots are able to do without that extra hassle. So it's weighing that and trying to get to the best solution. Yeah, Mr. Quinn?
And Mr. Cohen has his hand up. I think it's worth pointing out that based on our meeting on Friday with the professionals and Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but that a neighborhood zoning initiative of the sort that Mr. Zinder talked about that I think that we're all in favor of is a year-long process. And at this point, our goals have been set for this year, and I'll repeat that I don't think we can do the second part of neighborhood character. And Mr. Cohen, I would welcome you to chime in on whether you think that I'm going off topic here. But I think that we've set the second part of neighborhood character as a goal for the second half of this year, and I don't think we can get to that without neighborhood zoning.
So I have a couple things. First, I wanted to, just make the connection between Mr. Stern's comments and Mr. Zinder's comments, because that's exactly, there are a couple of neighborhoods that are extremely identifiable as both uniform in their nonconformity for lot size and for floor area. They're undersized for the lots, and they're oversized even beyond what the bonus would allow for floor area. And that the only solution for those neighborhoods, and Western and Southern Way have been identified as one, and the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood has been identified as another, is to redraw the zone boundaries and to put them into an appropriate zone where the lot sizes are corrected and where the density, the FAR is more appropriate to what's there. So that's part of what I see as being absolutely required as a companion piece to this. And as Mr. Zinder said, if you redraw the boundaries and you put lots into the correct zone, then the issue of the proportional FAR essentially goes away, which means you can remove it because nobody's affected by it anymore. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I think that the impacts of this ordinance are very modest on both sides, the positive side and the negative side. I have a gut feeling, and we'll see if the data bears me out, that this will have a modest positive impact on tax relief for people with undersized lots. I think it will have a modest reduction in teardowns. The numbers that I came up with, which were for the last 3 years, said that about 13% actually of the teardowns were actually utilized the proportional FAR to rebuild. In other words, it was about 21% that were on undersized lots, but not all of those even used the proportional FAR to rebuild. So, it's a small number of lots where teardowns would actually be discouraged. But the other piece of information that we're waiting for, we have some preliminary numbers, is that of the additions that have been done in recent years, very few have utilized the proportional FAR. So we have some architects in the community with their hair on fire saying 2,500 people are on undersized lots, and every one of them is going to be negatively impacted if we pass this ordinance. The reality is that a handful are going to be negatively impacted because many people, even if they're on an undersized lot, can do an addition without needing the proportional FAR. Of the others, some would need to go for a variance anyway because they need more than the proportional FAR to do what they want to do. So just to reiterate, I think the benefits and the detriments are modest. I'll make my final decision based on whether I think the benefits are more than the detriments, but I think everybody needs to calm down.
That's never good to say that. Well, I want to hear from everybody. Get a chance before we have second turns at the
I
mic.
just wanted to make a quick comment with regard to what Mr. Quinn had mentioned, and he had mentioned that he thought it would take at least a year to achieve a neighborhood zoning structure, and the reality is you've already done half the work already, because when you did the neighborhood analysis, the first thing that Looney Ricks Kiss, who did the planning study for that, did was a neighborhood scaled study, and so the hardest part of the work you've completed already. It's really a matter of drawing boundaries and looking at the zones you have now, which should only take 4 to 6 months. And, you know, in talking with land use attorneys, and I've talked to 7 of them about this subject in the last couple of weeks, and they all said that it should take weeks, not months, to achieve a restructuring of the zoning. So it's all how you think of things. And I agree with the mayor that, what is this, paralysis analysis, you know, on this one element of zoning, you're going to take 2 or 3 months to debate it, when in that time frame you can resolve it, you know, holistically. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Zinder. I have no expertise in this. I go with what the professionals told me, and as you know, building in Princeton takes longer than it does in other towns.
Chip Kreider, Bank Street. As I said before, this ordinance right now is an emergency brake. The problem is we've accidentally or maybe deliberately incentivized tear downs. On one data point you should be collecting with these tear downs and with the renovations is what was the value of the property before and what was the value after. You never see a tear down where they replace it with something that's the same value. It's always 3 times as much. And then that drives out the middle and the lower class. And then we say, oh, we're not affordable anymore. And we have this big affordable housing obligation. And we've created a circular firing squad. So you can pass it and you can eliminate it in a year or 2. It's an emergency brake. And I think, and I'm in favor of all the other improving the zoning, evening it out, but it's an emergency brake. One comment about people scratch their head. Why do we have this zoning with all these things that don't conform? Years ago, I had a discussion with one Marvin Reed, and we were discussing zoning, which I know a little bit about, and he said, oh, we try to fix it so everyone needs a variance. And I thought, you know, if you go back to the preamble of the state land use ordinances and the whole reason land use came about, it was not to discourage development, not to put all this control in, it was to encourage things. So that attitude was what was the attitude in place when all this was done, and it really didn't match with the law, but that's what was done. So there's your answer as to why we have this weird situation now. We wanted everyone to have a variance.
Well, thank you for that history lesson. That is definitely not our attitude now. But I think that you need a zoning board, obviously, and it's built into the law because you're never going to get your ordinances so that they work for every property. It's impossible. So that's, I think, it's an outlet for the exceptions, but I think the fact that we have 41% of our housing stock needs an exception is a sign that we need to make some changes. Galina.
Hi. I'm Galina Chernaya. I live at 258 Hawthorne for about 15 years now. And I am a victim and survivor of a tear down next door. Humongous McMansion's been built, trees were damaged, and I fully can echo one of the previous speakers regarding the water damage that's coming, and taxes. And only in our neighborhood, where are 18 houses. there are, in the section of Linden Street, which is at the intersection, there are 4 teardowns. 2 are coming up on Linden 146 and 150, and the other one is Linden 93. We all, when we meet our neighbors and talk about taxes, how that is going to impact our taxes. And we know how, in what direction taxes are going to go. We're just not sure how much and when. And we have various, I have wonderful neighbors, and they represent various social economic groups. However, myself included, I will be squeezed out of Princeton if the taxes go up. And every morning I wake up, is it going to be 15%? Is it going to be 18%? Can I afford to stay if it's that amount? And while the council is taking kind of a very laid-back approach to, yes, we will evaluate this idea, or perhaps there are some other ideas, we, real people, citizens, will be squeezed out of here. So I really urge the council to put priority on this. And yes, if it does need resources, perhaps you should consider putting more resources. And it should be taken as a holistically to look at that, not just the FAR as a tiny step, which is great, wonderful. However, a holistic approach, a more thoughtful, urgent addressing this issue should be done. And we'll come next month and we'll see how far we go. That's just to stop. I mean, this is an urgent issue. This is for many, many, many people. And by the way, contrary to someone who said here, 18 houses on our street, no one built an addition in 15 years I've been there. Everyone is worried about taxes and about affordability. So don't squeeze us out of Princeton. I want to stay here.
Hello again. Just to address Mr. Cohn's comments, you had said that, well, there's a benefit and there's some negative effect to this, but the people who get hurt are 100% hurt. Okay, so if their property values go down, it's a slight loss in taxes to the community, but it's a big loss to them. And in neighborhoods like Southern Way, Western Way, where I think a lot of the lots are undersized, and as I pointed out before, everyone else is already built. Some pretty big additions. I don't think we have any teardowns. I think in the interest of fairness, even the guy with the smallest house should be able to put a little bit of an addition on and not have to spend his savings on legal actions before the board, or I should say the zoning board. So I just wanted you to consider that if you just take an average, it looks nice, but the individuals would probably suffer greatly. Thank you.
Oh, can you state your name again for the record?
Mark Stern.
Thank you.
Michael Floyd, Quarry Street, also a member of the zoning board. And yes, we've been sending this for years regarding, and it was really targeting undersized large lots. And what I worry about is that you may prioritize undersized small lots for the character rezoning. I can appreciate some of the comments regarding doing it holistically and completely, but I would argue your need are not for the very small lot zones for immediate or the quickest addressing of this, but are for the larger undersized lots. And I think there's one part of this that we don't discuss is there may be a need to do some down zoning to eliminate so much exclusionary zoning in the town. To start with the small undersized lots, I think is, it's taking the easy stuff first, but not the most important stuff.
Can I ask you a question, Michael?
Yes.
What do you consider large? What do you see as that cutoff between large and small?
I haven't seen the numbers, so I hesitate to say that, and I don't think we hadn't been presented with it in the past anyway. But when you're talking a 1,200 square foot lot, that's very small. When you're talking a 3,000 square foot lot, a 4,000 square foot lot, a 5,000 square foot lot, and a good number of the undersized lots are in that range too. So I'm more saying you got to look at the 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 with more urgency than looking at the really small lot neighborhoods, which are not going to get a lot of tear downs or whatever anyway.
Right.
And plus, there's this need to have fairer zoning in town.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this ordinance? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to bring it back to council. And before we have our discussion, I wanted to ask our attorney, Trishka Cecil, if you could walk us through what the various options are. It sounds like there's not a burning desire to vote this ordinance up or down tonight, I think. And so if we want to
if you'd like to
keep it as an option, what are our options for keeping it as an option?
Okay, so if you don't want to actually vote on it, you can do one of two things. The first is you can simply carry the public hearing again like you did the last time, but you would have to carry it to a specific date. And I think at this point it's hard for you to know what that date would be. The other option is to table the ordinance, which basically, it doesn't kill it, but it removes it from consideration until you put it back on an agenda. So it does put it a little bit in limbo, but it keeps it alive. And then once it gets, if and when it gets relisted, my hunch is that it would be relisted with amendments that would need to be introduced. But in any event, there will certainly be, you can provide notice to the public when it goes back on an agenda for further action so that there's no surprise.
Okay. So my recommendation might be that we table it. I do have a couple further questions for you before you push away your mic. One was we just heard a recommendation that we focus this ordinance on larger lots, and if we were to put this forward where it would only apply to certain zones or lots of a certain minimum size, is that considered a substantive change? So would that require a reintroduction, or is that something that we could just put back on and have the public hearing about a slightly more targeted ordinance?
So the whole question of what constitutes so the statute says a substantial change to the substance of the ordinance. And it's a little, there's obviously no mathematical formula for figuring that out. I'd say this one is on the border in that, I mean, it is clearly making a change to the substance. On the other hand, I think it's one that the public can readily ascertain and determine the impact. At least, an individual can figure out what the impact would be to him or herself. So I think that's one where I would be more comfortable with you making the change and having the public hearing and voting on the same night. But it is on the cusp. It's not clearly not a substantial or substantive change, but I think it would be all right.
Okay.
If I may though, wouldn't we be inviting litigation if we vote on something and then someone could have a cause of action to say, well, that is a substantive change, but proper notice wasn't given?
It's less a question of notice in this instance as how much time does the public have to digest the information and figure out what position they want to take. And honestly, when anytime I'm confronted with this question, that's how I try to look at it, is it the sort of thing where you need to go back, you need to think, you need to do a lot of analysis to figure it out versus, okay, you've revised the ordinance so that it only applies to lots that are 3 acres and up. I mean, it's a little easier to determine. My hunch is that no matter what you do in this case, there's going to be some advance warning to everybody of what the ordinance, what condition it's in. Is it identical to how it's presented tonight, or has it been changed? And I have full confidence that this council is going to give the public adequate heads up to be able to evaluate and comment on what's being proposed.
Definitely. And then the other question that came up tonight, I know this has been raised in the past, is whether we have the ability to impose a moratorium on tear downs while we're working out the ordinances. And I know there's been other cities in the meanwhile who have tried this. So if you could report back to us at the next meeting with a definitive opinion on what our options are for that, because who knows, it's like there might be different case law out there than when we first asked this question a year ago. And I think there would be an appetite for putting on the emergency brakes, as Chip Kreider likes to call it, but to just give council a little bit of breathing room to not feel like every day that goes by we need to act. This ordinance was brought forward very quickly, and we got pushback that we were moving too quickly. So we want to move at the right pace.
Understood.
But to give ourselves some room to do that would be ideal if that's legal.
Yes, I will have a report for you at the next meeting.
Ms. Fargo?
Sorry, I did have another question. I was wondering whether we're exploring a neighborhood zoning option, if that's one of the options we're exploring, or if that would be a completely different ordinance that we would need to consider.
That's a different ordinance, because it would be creating new zones and redrawing the map. And this is really about
and new standards as
and
well.
new standards, right? So it would be like an ordinance introduction, and then would go to the planning board, and then would come back to council for a vote.
Okay.
And if I may comment on your proposal, Mayor, to Trishka about the legal side of a moratorium, and I think Mr. Zinder's comments carry a lot of merit, but I'm not sure if your analysis is going to also include what the cost may be to the town, because I truly foresee, not maybe because I'm an attorney, but I truly foresee litigation with this, because as we see in the analysis we've looked at so far, there are such things as good tear downs. Believe you me, I'm on the side, I spoke to Galena a couple times, visited her home. I'm on the side of limiting tear downs. However, we also see that there are such things as good tear downs. So if we start putting in a moratorium and folks feel that, they have a place that is not worth investing into renovating and they want to tear down, it may behoove you to consider, I'm not sure how that's going to be done, but what the cost analysis is going to be to the town, also in addition to the legal analysis.
I'll see what I can do.
Right.
And I guess I would ask that question broadly too. I think we've also heard a suggestion where you can put conditions on tear downs, and if those are met, then you can move forward, and if they're not, then you have to get some sort of additional approval for that. So it would be helpful to know what all of our options are, or if we're completely limited.
Yep, no problem.
Mr. Quinn?
Thanks, Mayor. I would urge my colleagues that if we are going to go ahead with tabling, that we have a timeline of when we're going to revisit this, and what we think is a reasonable time that we'll have enough data where we feel comfortable. I'm of the opinion that data will take us only so far, and we're going to have to make a decision, and we're not going to reach a data point where everyone's going to agree that this is the right thing to do. I was struck by something that that Kip said about the number and the number of teardowns and her belief that they're sort of scattered all over. That's not my experience. I think there are certain neighborhoods that once the process starts, it leads to a series. My neighborhood has seen 3 or 4 in the past 2 years, and these are what have traditionally been affordable neighborhoods that are where the houses that are replacing the houses that are torn down are not what I would call affordable. So I would, this is a long way of saying that I think that we do need to respect that there is a sense of urgency around this, and that we don't table and then it gets kicked into summer, and then we get into vacation season and we're back in the fall. I'd say I'm in favor of tabling for no more than a month. And I think we've gotten some indication from our professionals. We have this super intern in planning who's helping with a lot of the gathering. The information's there.
Yeah, I want to jump on Tim's comment and say for those reasons, I think I would prefer to carry it rather than table it, because then we have a specific date when we're going to hear it. It doesn't need to be in 2 weeks or 1 week. It could be in a month, but I think that in our meeting with staff, and you were there, Mayor, we had an indication that the last bits of information that we think are crucial to making a decision are not going to take a long time to generate. Within the next couple of weeks, we should have that information about the tax implications and about additions and how many are using the proportional FAR. And I think once we have that information, as Mr. Quinn said, we're going to have to make a decision. We may vote it down if we feel the benefits are too little, or we'll have to, vote for it. But I think that the idea that this is going to be amended in some way, let's just take the example of only applying it to certain size lots. There's no way to make people happy with that either, because the fact is that it's on the smaller lots that the neighbors are most dramatically impacted by the teardowns. It's on the quarter-acre lots where, the water is running right into the neighbor's basement, and where the trees are coming down right on the property line that were shading their house for all these years. I'm thinking of Galina's house. I think it's in those neighborhoods with the smaller lots that the impacts of the teardowns are most dramatic. So I personally wouldn't want to limit this rule only to, half acre and up zones, because I think we're completely missing the point of the ordinance if we do that.
Well, I will say to that I think we hear from all neighborhoods, and I know Michael's still here. I think the zoning board also hears when there are the larger lots, and often when it's a larger lot, you're talking about a much larger house and much greater tree loss.
Sure.
So
I'm not saying
also,
to eliminate.
yeah.
I'm not saying to eliminate large lots.
And also the flooding too can be exacerbated. But yeah, I hear your larger point too, Ms. Niedergang.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question for Trishka. Assuming that we cannot do any kind of ban on teardowns while we get our ordinances into effect, and in a month or 6 weeks or whenever we reconsider this ordinance, if we move towards tabling it, can we apply a sunset clause to the ordinance so that it takes effect for a year or 18 months while we are able to do the neighborhood, like another way of kind of having our cake and eat it too, so to speak, like to respond to people that are having a sense of urgency. Although again, I think Mr. Cohen is right that this is going to apply to only, again, going back to looking at the map and seeing how many houses can be so much larger as of right without the bonus FAR. I think, again, this is a modest step, but could we at some point in the near future pass this as a modest step with a sunset clause of a year, 18 months, while we get our more permanent and hopefully improved zoning done? Sorry, that was long and not direct, but I hope you, and I'm prepared to repeat the question if needed.
I think the answer is yes. I have to figure out the exact mechanics so that it doesn't get forgotten, and I'll include that in what I provide to you at the next meeting.
Thank you. And I just want to add a thank you not only to the public, but to my colleagues who I assume have also spent a lot of the last month working on this issue, to just being willing to step back and reconsider, and really, you know, as always, I think keeping the best interests of the town at heart and weighing the good and the bad. So everyone, I think, has approached this with, you know, the seriousness that it deserves, and I'm glad to be working with such a thoughtful group. So,
you're welcome.
Mayor, if I may.
Mr. Shield?
Just wanted to make a suggestion to council. Based on our meeting on Friday, what I would suggest that at the next meeting, staff would be prepared. There's some very specific information that the committee was looking for. We can have that information available that will pertain to the ordinance at hand. Staff is also looking at some alternatives. We can give you a better idea of what those alternatives would, in terms of timing, of how much time it would take to look at those alternatives. And at the same time, you can get the answers from the attorney. Maybe a good way to kind of resolve this and keep this going.
And what would you recommend? We have our meeting of April 8th, and then we have the 22nd. Is the budget the meeting of the April 8th?
Correct.
And that's also, we're having the report on the fire department. And then for the 22nd, I have down PEC is going to be giving the report on stormwater, but maybe that's a good meeting to do it on the 22nd.
No,
Okay.
no, that's going to be delayed.
Oh,
into May or June. I'm sorry.
You're right. No, I haven't updated my list here, but
Yeah,
that's
no,
actually
that
better.
so that will not be coming up in April.
All right, so we have even more space at that
Bandwidth,
meeting on the 22nd. So my recommendation then, if council wants to continue the public hearing, so we have a firm date, is that we continue the public hearing to the meeting of April 22nd. Is that okay? Michael, is that okay with, do you think you'll be ready for that?
I think we will be. Yeah, I think that's adequate.
Okay, great.
If I may ask, I just don't want to feel like we're over-promising. When we talk about issues of carrying versus tabling, or even looking at April 22nd, right now we're only talking about the proportional FAR ordinance, right? We've also mentioned that only 13% of tear downs use proportional FAR, correct? So when we're talking about the broader issue of limiting tear downs, I just want the public to understand that whatever we do with proportional FAR is only a very small part of that. So of course the greater question, the two greater questions sit out there, which is what we discussed earlier about what we're going to be doing about zoning in general, and what we're doing about zoning as it affects tear downs. What we do with proportional FAR, and I personally, my position is from our last meeting about I wouldn't want to vote for anything that harms, which would increase the chance that smaller lot owners would have to go to the zoning board to get a variance. But the bottom line is, even when we tackle the proportional FAR issue over the next few weeks, it's only going to be a very small part of the solution for tear downs, and a very small part of the solution for the zoning problems we've been having for the last few decades.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think part of the challenge is that there's no magic bullet that's probably going to be able to have an effect across the board. So it's just a question of how we want to approach that. I mean, the other idea that's come up to have the neighborhood zoning is going to make it easier for people to do what they need to do without going before the zoning board, but does nothing to address the tear down issue, I don't think.
It could in an extreme, let me give you an example.
Well, if we downzone as part of it.
Exactly. I mean, which is
Right.
very appropriate in certain neighborhoods where we've got 800, 900 square foot homes consistently on small lots.
Right.
You know, and the ones that are getting torn down, they're building 2,200, 2,300 square foot,
Right.
you know, by right. So you could downzone.
Well, I would say if we're creating a lot of extra zones and downzoning those zones, I would say that Mr. Zinder's estimate that this will take a couple weeks would be wrong. I'm just teasing you. Okay. So
I would just repeat what I said before to my colleague, the Councilman Williamson, that the numbers don't really, it's not a question of how many, it's a question of where and what the effects are. So you could have a small overall number that disproportionately affects one or two neighborhoods that are the truly affordable neighborhoods and what's left of the middle-class neighborhoods in Princeton, and that creates a sense of urgency, not the overall number, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, just to sum up, I think we are all committed to try to address this issue. I think we've heard it's important. We're trying to deal with it both quickly and also thoughtfully and with data. So with that, is there a motion to continue the public hearing
So
to the
moved.
meeting of April 22nd?
So moved.
And is there a second? So it's been moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
Okay, so the public hearing is being continued to the meeting of April 22nd, 2019. And now we come to Ordinance 2019-8, an ordinance by the Municipality of Princeton concerning right-of-way permits and amending Chapter 19 entitled Streets, Sidewalks, Bike Lanes, and Shared Use Paths of the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And this ordinance has to do with new regulations on utility poles. And is there someone, I don't know, Trishka or Mr. DeShield, or someone who can walk us through the main points of this ordinance?
The main point of this ordinance is to provide just some standards and controls that we actually can place on wireless installations with the new federal regulations. They take away a lot of the municipal control, and what this ordinance does is just put what we legally can do, we're allowed to do, and put some standards on it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. DeShield before we open up the public hearing?
Well, I just wanted to comment that it's not just poles, they're calling them in the ordinance cabinets, but I think of them as pods, those big pods that are attached, that are proliferating everywhere.
Okay. So I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. Would anybody like to speak to it? All right, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Is there any discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Quinn and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
The ordinance passes unanimously. Next, we come to the next ordinance, and because it has to do with a rezoning for our affordable housing plan, and because Princeton University is part of our affordable housing plan, I've been advised to recuse myself, so I'm going to turn the gavel over to Ms. Krummeller.
So I'd like to offer the ordinance, which one are we on?
-10.
2019-10.
10.
Okay, here it is. An ordinance to amend Chapter 10B of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use and the Princeton Zoning Map to create an AH3 affordable housing 3 residential zone and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton.
If we can, we just want to step in. There are some issues with this ordinance that we want to explain. They have to do with both a noticing issue and some amendments from the planning board.
So the first issue is that this ordinance does effectuate what's called a classification change under the municipal land use law because you're creating a new zone. And that requires a specific notice to everyone within 200 feet. And accidentally, that notice was not provided in this instance. So, so even on the ordinance in its current form, you couldn't hold the public hearing tonight because we call it super notice for short, wasn't provided. In addition, the planning board has recommended a number of changes to the ordinance. And those are the types of changes that would require introduction and also postponing the public hearing for that reason as well. So my suggestion would be that the council perhaps take up now whether you wish to amend the ordinance as recommended by the planning board. If you do want to amend the ordinances as recommended by the planning board, then what you are doing technically is introducing the amendments tonight and then having a public hearing on April 8th on the amended ordinance. And in the interim, notice will be provided to all of the 200-foot property owners as required under the statute of the ordinance with the amendments.
Okay, so procedurally, we want to just table this, or
No, here's what
I know we're going to amend it, but we have that. We have another.
Here's what I would suggest. Only because we're just to amend the ordinance. There is a ordinance on Ordinance 15 for introduction. We need to amend the agenda to take that off the agenda, and we'll just make that amendment so that we can then just move the hearing to a new date.
So let me re-explain it.
No, I think we all understand it.
In other words, you don't need to do
it.
a new ordinance. You don't need 29-15 as a new ordinance. And so rather than defeat this ordinance and then introduce 29-15, I'm saying 29-15 is not even needed. Introduce amendments to this ordinance. So it retains the same number, it's the same ordinance, it's just amended, and then hold a public hearing on the 8th on the amendment. Okay, so
the first order of business is discussing not the ordinance, but the suggestions in that ordinance to amend, to amend the new ordinance. Correct?
Were those,
the old ordinance.
Were those part of the council packet? I don't.
There are two ordinances. There's a new ordinance. It was going to be a new ordinance, but now it's been decided to make that amendments to the old ordinance instead of a new ordinance.
But you're correct.
So it's 2019-15. That's where that's now going to be a version of.
It's going to be the amended.
It's going to be the amended new ordinance, the amended old ordinance.
If I could ask Councilman Cohen to review what's in the amendment, to cover the amendments that will hopefully be moving and adding to the existing ordinance. And these are largely things that were discussed at the planning board. I was not at that meeting.
There's just, sorry, Councilman Cohen, just one more thing. So first, just for the sake of the record, the amendments that are recommended by the planning board are also laid out in the referral memo that they provided, in addition to also being shown in 29-15. I did pick up tonight one error in both ordinances. If you'll recall, before you introduced ordinance 2019-10, there was a subsection that was removed dealing with access to the site. And I noticed when I was reviewing the red line draft tonight that subsection is still in there and it's not supposed to be. I've already
Correct.
sent out the necessary emails to have that corrected, but I just wanted it in the record so that, you know, if you introduce the amendments, just also have in mind that subsection E2B that was struck before you introduced it is in there in error. And will
Is
be
this
struck.
about the Herrontown
That's-
Road? Okay,
yes, yeah.
I was wondering about that. Thank you.
So the other changes, there were a couple that were brought up by Alvin, who's more of an expert, I guess, on affordable housing regulations. Just as an example, there are references to COA rules, and he pointed out that the COA is really not functional right now, so he suggested changing the language to refer to New Jersey's affordable housing regulations as in effect at the time of the ordinance. So there were a couple of changes like that made reference to other affordable housing regulations that got corrected. And then there was one change, a similar sort of deletion to the deletion about Harrington Road entrance and exit, which had to do with the height restriction on the wing of the building that is away from Harrington Road. And there was sort of an alternative design for the building that had been proposed, which is has some significant advantages, and but would have been in conflict with that language. So there was an amendment to strike that provision, saying that saying where the three-story building, the three-story portion of the building had to be. And then there were a couple of minor changes having to do with sustainability. There was a clause saying the design should be sustainable wherever possible, and we struck the wording wherever possible. It's still going to be wherever possible, but they didn't want to water it down. A requirement to put in an electric vehicle charging station, little things like that. So that's basically the sum of what. Okay.
I got a question. I mean, there are several concerns that came up at the last Affordable Housing Board meeting. So my question is, I guess it may be a question for Trishka as much as it is a question for us, is where do we include issues such as where the Affordable Housing Board wants the developers to agree that at least one parking spot per unit would be included in the rental cost? Because of course we run into the issue when you're dealing with low income housing, that here you already have folks who are low income by definition, and now, as in some other places that were recently developed in our wonderful town, where folks, in addition to what they pay for rent, now have to pay in addition for parking.
Yeah.
Which makes it less affordable. So the question is, where do these very important issues come up? I mean, is it part of the zoning or?
We discussed that. I can't remember what the conclusion was.
That would belong in your affordable housing ordinance, because it's not really a function of zoning, and it's actually not appropriate for zoning.
Okay.
But it would go into your affordable housing ordinance, where it would be very appropriate.
I think it's in the that we were talking about changing the definition of rent.
It's actually one of the, yes, that's one of the things that we have brought up.
Like what's included in rent. Everyone knows that heat, a heating system or a sink, or, and so some of the things like garbage removal and parking we might consider.
So we're suggesting that at a certain point we're going to have to introduce an ordinance to change the definition of rent in Princeton. And we hope to include at least one parking spot per unit.
Or I don't know, it might be just in the affordable
in the ordinance, what we will do,
ordinance.
the issue to deal with this is to define what rent is. That then eliminates the ability for the landlord to charge an additional fee for rent for parking. So what we'll have to do is we have to amend the ordinance anyway as we go through our affordable housing process, and we can define what rent can be composed of, and that will resolve that issue.
Okay. And then that also would apply to my follow-up question, which is about amenities and whether or not amenities are mandatory or not. So I guess everything we discussed here also apply to those. And I apologize. I don't want to like hog the mic here, but just some very important issues here. Pool fees, if any, I guess can also apply to that. And where would we ask the developer or require the developer to include providing a copy of what their proposed tenant application would be to the Affordable Housing Board, and also what their screening practices would be?
That's typically addressed in, that's part of the affirmative marketing obligations, and that's also going to be addressed when you eventually do your housing element and your fair share plan. There's going to be like a whole compliance packet. And what I don't recall is if the affirmative marketing provisions are standalone or if they're incorporated in the affordable housing ordinance, but it's all going to be in that package that goes along with your compliance plan.
Okay, so that would not be part of the
That would
zoning
not be
discussion.
in zoning. No.
Right. Thanks.
Mr. LaPlace, do you have anything to add to what Mr. Cohen said about the changes?
I don't think so. Mr. Cohen was very thorough, so I was going to mention the environmental design features, but those were mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, so now we open up, or do we introduce, do we amend it, or?
Well, you would need a motion and a second and a vote on amending the ordinance as recommended by the planning board. And then assuming that such a motion is made and passes, then set the public hearing on the amended ordinance for April 8th at 7 p.m. And then that will be noticed in the newspaper, and notice will be provided individually to everyone within 200 feet of the property.
Okay, so is there?
I'll move the amendments as outlined in the memo from the planning board.
Second.
And taking out subsection E2B?
Well, and that's more, you don't need to include that in the motion. That was just more, I wanted to point out that was a typo in effect, that the section isn't supposed to be there and will be removed.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Mr. Quinn.
Ms. Niedergang?
Yes.
Oh, are we going to ask for public comments, though? I mean, we usually ask.
The introduction is no public comment.
Well, we usually let people speak. And introductions, don't we?
No, you're going to be having a public hearing on these amendments.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Still yes.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. I mean, the ordinance introduction.
And public hearing.
The public hearing is set for April 8th. Mayor comes back.
Okay. Are we at 2019-11? Yes. Okay, so next is ordinance 2019-11, bond ordinance amending sections 3E1, 3E4, and 6B of bond ordinance number 2015-07 of Princeton in the County of Mercer, New Jersey, finally adopted April 27, 2015, in order to remove part of a description, to amend a description, and the useful life, and to amend the average useful life. And this is mostly a cleanup ordinance, but are there any questions from council before we open up? We got to open up the public hearing first. Would anybody like to speak to this ordinance? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing.
I'll move it.
And it's been moved by Ms. Crummiller.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Cohen. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
So the ordinance has been approved unanimously. And next we come to ordinance 2019-12, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton vacating a portion of the Turkeyune right-of-way situated between Mount Lucas Road and New Jersey State Highway Route 206 to facilitate the conveyance of said right-of-way to the Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad pursuant to NJSA 4067-1 and NJSA 40A 12-21A. And before we get started, I did want to ask Mr. DeShield, because we have been receiving a lot of emails from concerned neighbors and others about the fueling station, if you can speak to what the process is for that moving forward.
Thank you, Mayor. As you're aware, the municipality has received a number of inquiries related to the new municipal fueling station, and we recognize and understand that the stark nature of the facilities at this point. However, it's important we want to keep in mind that the site is still under construction, and that the site does not reflect the final condition that the property will be in, so we want to keep that in mind. One thing I also want to say is that the fueling station, by the end of the process, it will be well integrated into the new site. We will be adding things, landscaping to the property. We actually know there were some concerns from neighbors concerning the new development. We will be having a public meeting and inviting the neighbors in to kind of have some discussion about screening. In addition, as you see out there, there are the cinder block wall. That's not complete. There will be a brick face on that cinder block wall that will reflect the same brick face on the new building. What I would ask council, and there will be landscaping around it. In addition, by the end, we're committed that there is a well-integrated site there. Once the PFARS building is constructed, it's important we allow that process to complete. We will go back and reevaluate it at that point to see if there are additional improvements so that we have a site there that we can all be proud of.
Mayor, can I just ask a quick question? So the memo explaining the process of developing this site and why the drawings weren't available to show people when the PFARS site came up was very helpful. But one thing that I know came up at the last meeting in council that wasn't addressed was what alternative sites were looked at and why this site for fueling was decided on. I wonder if you could just address that briefly.
Sure. There were a number when the project first began prior to 2014. There were a number of sites that were reviewed, and there's a number of rationales why we picked this particular site. We looked at site like the River Road site, the Harrison Street Garage, the Dron Street, Valley Road School site, Mountain Lakes parking lot, Shmoria Park, Franklin Lot, Princeton Shopping Center, Princeton University, also looking whether we could work with the university and their fueling station. And after reviewing all of these alternatives, really the best alternative was here. There's a number of reasons. I don't know if everyone is aware that our fueling station is not only for municipal purposes, it also includes fueling the fire engines and the school buses. And just the site and the space that we need to provide those, the ability to fuel those vehicles. In addition, it is very close to our police department. The other thing we looked at with our experience with Hurricane Sandy was a need in looking from the emergency management perspective. Having a station that was close to our emergency management operations, which is in our police department, was important to us also. So we took all those factors it really became the only location was to relocate the site right there at the PFARS location.
And then also before we open the public hearing, I just want to ask Ms. Stockton if you can talk about the left turn issue from Valley onto 206 and where we stand with that with the DOT and what the plan is to move forward with that.
Sure. So there have been numerous comments that we've received about reopening the left turn from Valley Road onto southbound 206. And our consultant reached out to DOT to inquire about the possibility of doing that. They responded back that they would not approve it at this time. They see that there are not adequate gaps in the traffic on 206 to allow for those left turn movements within the stream of traffic on 206. As well, they're concerned about stopping sight distance on 206. So what we're proceeding with our traffic consultant is to gather all of the necessary data about the traffic counts, the speed and volume of traffic, as well as looking at the geometrics to see if there is a rebuttal that we can provide on that left turn possibility, as well as looking at the overall function of the road system and determining what proposed improvements we want to put forth. We know this is the center of town. We know we're close to schools. When we first started this in 2014, we were at the time between the hospital and Avalon Bay. So the traffic study that was done at that time, which has now since expired, didn't even have Avalon as an existing condition. So you layer upon that the change in the school travel times was also not imagined, start times was not imagined at that time as well. So by doing the traffic counts again, now we can get a realistic picture of what our current traffic needs are and move ahead to consider kind of in the same conversation like I presented earlier about Nassau Street, looking at the road for all users, not just for the people that want to get from point A to point B at the fastest rate. We need to look at it that at sometimes we may need to consider having a little bit of congestion if it is a safer overall operation for our municipality, and that's one of the things that the traffic consultant will be looking at. Do we want to blow Cherry Hill up to 5 lanes getting out of town, or do we want to look at something that's more consistent with the area and a safer operation? So we're gathering data in April, and when we come back for the meeting on April 15th, I'll have more information about, April 1st, I will have more information about what the schedule is to have recommendations for council and public consideration moving forward.
Thank you. Did you have a question related to that?
I think it would be inappropriate for me to ask my question.
Okay. I want to ask a question about the neighborhood meeting. Is there a date set for that yet?
It is not set. I think we're looking at that week of April 8th, 9th, 10th. We do have that hidden in plain sight event on one of the nights that you had suggested. So I think we're looking at the other 2 dates that were in that week, and that also gives us adequate time to reach out to the neighborhood. Next week felt a little too soon to be able to do that.
Right, okay. Are there any other questions before we open up the public hearing? Nope. Okay, so I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance, and we're going to start with Dunbar Burney.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Limpert and council members. Dunbar Burney, I live at 60 Laurel Road, and so I'm a regular driver through this complicated intersection, and I've been living here for 15 years and often found that very short piece of road that you're planning to close, or you have now closed for construction, carries a lot of traffic, and especially traffic that turns left to go south on 206. Now that traffic is funneled into the traffic light and creates a much more dangerous transaction for traffic coming out of Cherry Hill and from Mount Lucas and Witherspoon, all converging at that one intersection. So the left turners coming down the hill and the left turners who had been on that small piece of Darien before are often head-to-head waiting. The traffic backs up for a long distance. People get impatient, and before it was negotiable because those who would turn left could bypass the traffic light and then find their way south on 206 in a safe way. So I really hope that you have some way of backpedaling and looking into a traffic study before you actually close that road down. I understand that there may be a need to have it closed during a period of construction, and so I can live through a construction phase until we build a nice, appealing facility there. But I hope there's a way that we could have a design that would allow that to reopen as a safe transit for our neighbors and population. Thanks.
Thank you. If there's anybody else who'd like to speak on this ordinance, I'd welcome you up to the microphone at this point.
I'm Shirley Chan. I live on Harris Road. I'm very familiar with the neighbors several blocks around, walk around a lot. I attended the sessions provided by the rescue squad at the center at Harrison, and we were shown very detailed the plans, the building, all these details about, and I was informed that they will close the Mount Lucas roadblock and become part of the property. And so we asked what happened to the Valley Road. We currently could not turn left. And the rescue squad chief said that it would be reopened for left turn. That was his word, okay? So apparently he made a promise without really getting approval by the state because it's a state highway. And I think that was bad. The other thing is that we were talking about the moving of the fueling tanks for the town vehicles and buses. He did mention it would move to the area where close to the still on Witherspoon Street, or it should be called Mount Lucas Road, and be accessible by all these important vehicles. And I knew that, but I did not know, and there was no drawing, there was such a canopy built to it. And I was really surprised that, last week things stood up. Where that happened, it wasn't in the drawings at all. Not as I think that was the November time. And I thought this is a building that they want people to support facility, this is not what I was informed. And I really was caught surprise. And could you fill me in about that canopy?
Well, I'm collecting the questions and then we'll address them at the end, but go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Chip Casto, Laurel Road, been there 5 years, been in town for 10, been teaching at the high school for 11. First, please excuse, I'm going to read a letter from a neighbor that was unable to make it tonight. Dear Mrs. Mayor and members of the Town Council, I'm writing this letter because I'm not able to appear at the meeting in person. I wish I could be there in person to express my deep dissatisfaction for the development of the site bordered by Mount Lucas, Valley Road, and Route 206. It is spring break for Princeton Public Schools, and many families with school-aged children like mine take this opportunity to go away on vacation. The date of this meeting is even more disappointing since on the agenda is a matter which pertains to a neighborhood with many school-aged children. This neighborhood is valuable for its proximity to all 3 schools and to the center of town. There are no fewer than 20 school-aged children who walk or bike to school along Mount Lucas, and this does not even count the significant number of adults who walk and bike to work along this street. I've lived in the neighborhood for 13 years and I've had children walking to the public schools for just as long. The traffic at the intersection of Mount Lucas on the way to CP and Witherspoon Street has always been dangerous. Several of my neighbors and I have registered complaints year after year asking for a crossing guard at the intersection of Terhune because of the especially dangerous curve, to no avail. The construction of the new First Aid and Rescue Squad building requires that the section of Terhune between Mount Lucas and Route 206 be closed. I'm interested that you are only now seeking this approval, although construction of the building began months ago and the foundation are already complete. With the temporary closure of this section of Terhune due to the construction, the traffic is measurably worse. And we've seen an increase in reckless drivers desperately trying to get out of or into town. Traffic backup and confusion create a complete disregard for pedestrians. I personally have almost been hit by aggressive drivers on countless occasions. Now for the filling station. I was present at the SPRAB, I believe, meeting when the application for First Aid and Rescue Squad was presented. Among other suggestions, the board strongly suggested that another location be found, as the building and associated parking and driveway take up so much space and that the traffic in this area is already so busy. I understand that for several reasons this is the preferred location by municipal engineers. However, it is one thing to relocate the existing filling station further north on the lot. It is quite another thing to create an enormous above-ground white concrete monstrosity right at the gateway to our town and to our neighborhood, and then to add a gigantic canopy. I do not remember seeing plans and evaluations for this creation and speak as a neighbor and as a municipal volunteer. This is not how small-town democracy works. I speak for myself and my neighbors when I say that we feel that the wool has been pulled over our eyes. We are horrified and truly disappointed in our leadership for being so opaque and short-sighted. Construction must be stopped and a reasonable solution found that we will do justice to the intelligent, engaged townspeople who work so hard to maintain the charming streetscapes of our town. Sincerely, Louisa Bartle Clayton. And I just need to add that it does seem like it's pretty much out of the blue. It will take a lot of landscape to integrate basically a gas station into that area. The safety issue is a pretty large one, as well as explaining to my kids driving through what certain profanity and middle fingers mean, as that literally has happened to us several times in the morning. Please take the time to go there at 8 a.m. and participate in the congestion and interaction there. If it is not alleviated, it will become a vortex of just unsafe, unmanageable, disgruntled people coming in and out of town. And I apologize for going over my time. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Heidi Fichtenbaum, 38 Carnahan Place. I was also very surprised, given that I frequently look at site plan review for the Princeton Environmental Commission, to see that canopy go up for the filling station. And surprised and dismayed. I think that area of town is one of the key gateways to our town. And to decide that a gas station is the correct, iconic move that represents gateway is really farcical. To add insult to injury, somehow they couldn't even get the downspout color to match the color of the posts that support the canopy. So the posts are the dark bronze and the downspouts are bright white. So anyway, I think that there is no amount of landscaping or screen walls that will change the character of a gas station filling canopy. And so, although all the functional criteria that drove the location of the filling station, I can get that. But then there are other criteria that also need to be considered. And so if this particular function needed to be in this location, then there needed to be a much more creative solution to the canopy, or a much more less imposing solution, so that the filling station was something that, as it was before, because it was there before, was really not very noticeable. It took an area that had a lot of trees and even some artwork, because it was this sort of gateway moment in Princeton, and, turned it into something very industrial looking. So I am also looking forward to the opportunity to work to try and modify this particular move for our town. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to take a pause and try to answer some of the questions that have come up, and then hear some more testimony. So one question that has come up is this idea of the canopy and the problems with the canopy. And is that canopy required, or is it something where, I should say with the process, this didn't go through a normal process, so this was not a plan that was approved, really. So, and given that it is in a really critical spot, I think it would be good to have it go through some sort of, I think we should take another look at it. And I don't know the right time to do that, and we might want to wait for the PFARS building to be constructed and sort of see how it fits in. But it's a very long-winded way of asking, is that canopy there because of it's required, or because it's helpful for particular reasons? If you could, either
Sure.
Dan or Mark, speak to that.
Gentlemen,
Clearly, it's not there for aesthetic reasons.
No. Actually, it's not a required component. It is there. It allows for one of the issues, is environmental issues with rain and the pumping, and then gasoline getting out is one of the issues. The other issue is just the ability for the equipment that's there that keeps it dry. So there's a number of kind of functional issues why the canopy is there, but no, is not required.
Okay, because I think part of the issue is that when we've been talking about the moving of the fueling station, I think most of us were under the assumption that it was just the moving of the fueling station, and the old fueling station didn't have a canopy. So I think that was part of the surprise, but that's good to know that it's not a necessary component. The other point I just wanted to clarify was the asking of the DOT for the left turn on Valley Road. And this was not a recent request. So the town has been in communication with DOT regarding 206 for over a year, I believe.
Well, we've been working on this since 2014.
Yeah, it seemed like a while. And there's obviously now a new administration. And I don't know if there's ways we can collect better data now that the road has been closed. Hearing the graphic description of that 8 a.m. traffic, I mean, it's right next door to us, so many of us experience it in real life too, but I'm wondering if there's some way to capture that. Council President Krummeler is always talking about setting up a camera, but I don't know if we could set up a camera and just have it on for that hour, that really bad hour in the morning, and then maybe speed up the video and bring it with us when we meet with DOT so they can see the problems that it's causing. Sometimes just seeing the real life is better than their model. Sorry, I'm like going off script here. You probably want to hear the rest of the public hearing, but if people want to ask questions.
I was just wondering, we did have a left turn and there weren't very many accidents. I mean, were there accidents on Terhune? We had the left turn, and so how is that so much different from the left turn on Valley? I mean, did you talk to them about that?
We did not. I can only suppose that because it's closer to Cherry Hill, that created better gaps, especially when the traffic signal on Cherry Hill was changing. Plus, it was at more of a tangent location rather than on the curve. We did not ask that question. From what I understood, though, from the former municipal engineer, Princeton had actually, his recollection is that Princeton had asked for the left turn from Valley onto 206 to be removed. Just to put that there.
So we might have a history of having it there with no accidents or few accidents.
Well, I think we asked for the left turns to be removed. I'm assuming because of a crash history.
Oh, okay.
Mayor,
hold on.
If I could just ask, so it's there, to go back to the canopy, it's there for functional purposes. I drove down Terhune a recent evening, and it does, as you're going down the hill, looks sort of, we spent a large part of the meeting talking about things that are out of scale, and I wondered if we do need it for function, whether it can be lowered, because it seems like it's pretty high to be serving as an effective, rain stop. I don't know what it's made of, but I know that with engineering, all things are possible. And I'm wondering if a little bit lower and maybe a green roof would
The one thing, and I think the mayor asked the right question, is when is the right time to take a look at that? One, that entire site is really going to change tremendously. And I would suggest to council that the right time to really do that reevaluation is as the other buildings are there, because you're going to get a different scale than we see now once everything's in place, looking at whether there should be some changes or not. So I would suggest that.
Due respect, it's always going to be the first thing as you're driving down Terhune. So, but anyway, I'm willing to leave it there, but it seems that it's a little bit high, and if it could be lowered, I know it's not like an adjustable basketball backboard or something like that, but anyway.
It's set at that height to manage our largest fire truck as well as the school buses.
Kip Cherry Dempsey, of course, you're in my neighborhood again. So I was very shocked to turn the corner on Mount Lucas and all of a sudden to see that thing. The issue about fire engines and buses being there, quite frankly, I never saw a fire engine or a bus at the old facility. Now, maybe there were once in a while, but I would go by there frequently. I never saw one, so maybe there's some change in use that's being considered. No? Well, anyway, I never noticed a fire engine at that pump before, and I don't remember ever seeing a bus there either. So I think that's, if there is an expectation of more of those kinds of large vehicles, there should be design for that, and I don't see enough room, frankly, myself. Another thing is I don't see any room for screening, and that should have been 101 in the design of this canopy, that it would be set back from the road sufficiently to provide for screening. Plants, trees, something. It is a gateway, and it wasn't the most beautiful gateway in the world. We were all hoping it would be improved, not the other way around. The other thing is that traffic coming off of Terhune, I would normally just go right out to 206 and make a left-hand turn, and now I can't do that. It's blocked off. So all of those folks are going up to the Cherry Hill light. And it's not a very long piece there. And so the people making a left-hand turn and going straight across 206 are blocking the way. And those that want to make a right-hand turn and go up 206 north can't get to that part. So I would even suggest maybe a temporary left-hand turn lane. You know, it would chew up a little bit of land, but that's public land right there. So, you know, something to give us some relief. This is not going well. And I'm afraid there's going to be an accident, quite frankly. Another thing is that for quite a while there's been a right-hand turn from Valley Road onto Mount Lucas without a light. You know, just if you can make it go around the corner. And those of us trying to come down to Hume would often all of a sudden find ourselves being approached by a vehicle that just came off Valley that we didn't see before. And I've long been ready to suggest that right-hand turn on Red be disallowed. And if it's still there, I think that would be an immediate thing that could be done, is to stop that from happening, because that makes it really difficult to make a left-hand turn from Terhune. So I think that we need to get design people really thinking about this, about the aesthetics and about the transportation circulation, and I don't understand why it wasn't done before. And I have to feel, as I know the neighbors feel, a lot of them, the other neighbors, that there's a lack of transparency in all this. So I hope we can get off to a better start by kind of getting out our pencil. And quite frankly, if the filling station has to be relocated, so be it, because it's a gateway to our town. It's going to be there for 75 years. And it doesn't look very good, and it doesn't work, I don't think. So thank you.
Thank you. I would ask that people who haven't had a chance to speak yet be given priority.
Michael Floyd, 35 Quarry Street. And I think for me with the canopy, not to pile on, I've talked to the mayor a little bit. And if I would imagine an architect could take about 15 minutes and come up with some alternative designs, you know, with computer-generated designs. And I think whether the canopy is functional or whether it's necessary functional, I think is another question. Could it be done without? You know, it could be looked at. You know, there's a lot of filling stations that don't have canopies. But it wasn't, the actual drawing of it didn't exist when it came to the zoning board, which we really didn't have the right to turn down any of the design anyway because it's government property. But yes, it is quite shocking to all of you.
Hi, can I just add what to Dunbar Burney said and Chip Costo about the existing traffic. If you imagine that traffic then added to by fire engines, police cars, ambulances, it's going to get very crowded there at rush hour and whenever there's an emergency. So I think that's going to be a real bottleneck unless it's changed.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, for right now, is it in use?
The gas station, yes, it is.
Dana Molina, and I'm on Laurel Road. I spoke last time. I hope you can see that I'm not alone in my comments from last time when I was here only with my mother. I've lived in town my whole life. I moved away, came back, and I just want to say, again, that good design really takes collaboration and thought, and this site had none of that. And I've been a public servant for this town. I sat on SPRAB. I know what it's like when the town treats outside projects. We didn't follow our own requirements of others for this project. And I know how much everybody cares about our town. This project is not going well. I think that you have to reopen Terhune in terms of the traffic until you have a plan for what's going to happen with the traffic in that intersection. It's been 4 years, as Deanna said, that you guys have been thinking about what to do around the traffic. And we don't have a solution still, so we shouldn't make it worse until we've figured out what we're doing. By eliminating Terhune is an option and vacating it permanently, we're taking out of the equation better traffic patterns for the immediate while we figure out what's going to happen. A left from Valley could be the right solution, I think, because in fact, in some ways it might be better. But we haven't been approved for that yet. So we shouldn't be taking something away and making things even worse, especially when we're doing it for a public safety building, right? We're introducing the idea of town municipal buildings being in one place is great. I get that. But not without thought and without good design and without input and feedback. And this is a pretty critical part. As everybody said, it's the entrance to our town. It has a feel, and it had a feel. It had plantings. It was a gateway. It was a transitional space into some more municipal buildings, but it transitioned a neighborhood, and we've taken that all away. When you drive Terhune, you see the eyesore. When I exit my home, I see a gas station where I used to see trees and plants. And I also see total congestion where I literally can't get out to get to school or get back. I have to go up Jefferson. I have to go down 206 because I literally can't get down Mount Lucas because it's so backed up, whereby I used to be able to even get by cars. And people are angry and they're frustrated and they're getting more aggressive because the longer it's closed because there's no outlet. So please, I really encourage you to halt construction. Do not continue building this eyesore until designs have actually been reviewed. You have incredible people on SPRAB, incredible architects like Heidi, who would really look at this and think about how do we make this a nice spot if it has to be there, but take the canopy down if it's not required. It's hideous. And don't remove traffic patterns until you've figured out what you're doing. Please, thank you.
I would like to make a comment about left turn from Valley Road to 206. I am over 40 years resident of Princeton. I own my house almost 40 years. About 20 years ago, before one can make a left turn on Valley Road, and so as Terhune, okay, they were the. And as far as I can remember, and I attended meetings, the town was asked by the state DOT to disallow a left turn on Valley Road, saying that that's enough from Terhune, and also options on Cherry Hill Road. And the state did not want to add a traffic light because there are too many traffic lights. They are trying to. So the compromise between the town and the DOT was to disallow Valley Road left turn, allowing right turn, and the Terhune remain allowed left turn. So we worked it out because we didn't have to deal with the traffic light on Valley Cherry Hill Road to make a left turn. When I attended the fact meeting about the design of the new rescue squad, we confront that closing of Terhune block. The chief said that it's already agreed with the town, so we didn't even have a choice to challenge that. It wasn't a hearing; it was just telling us, that's it, the drawing's all done. But he was saying that we would be allowed to have a left turn on Valley Road onto 206 South, okay? So I thought that was all worked out, but I guess it's not. So that's kind of, I wasn't giving a proper fact disclosure. So that's bad because you people have not worked out the details and went ahead and make that closure of the Terhune. And in terms of the gas pump, the storage tank, it was very hidden away. Almost nobody noticed it except us that are in the lake neighborhood. So you can do the same thing. Where can tuck away. You don't have to be such a expressive, feeling canopy like somebody gonna put. You can still be very as, hiding away well in and have a driveway in and out. That's not a problem. But why you be so impulsive? I don't understand that, okay? But before you have no problem with the weather, now why you have a problem with weather? But before no problem, but a gas filling, the tank come in and fill that and went away, and other vehicle come and pump. Nobody noticed it except us.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay?
Mark Frieda. I live on Fisher Avenue. I'm also president of Princeton First Aid Squad. So I just wanted to get up and clarify for the record comments made by a member of the public just now. At neighborhood meetings that the squad held, at SPRAB, at the zoning board, the squad was very clear in saying that the town had a traffic plan, and the town's traffic plan was talking to DOT about a traffic light at Valley and 206 that DOT said they would put in and would allow for emergency use by the squad to get onto 206, but that it would be a light that could be made into a fully functional light at some point in the future if DOT changed their mind and allowed that. And that is what we said at every public meeting and every neighborhood meeting that we held. So I just want to be clear that at no time did we ever promise anyone or say it was a done deal. We outlined what we were told by the town as far as Valley and 206 and by the town at Cherry Hill and the little piece of Mount Lucas where they all hit 206 and the DOT's plans to greatly expand that. Just wanted to be clear on that. I'm sorry, one other thing. Every meeting we held, we showed where the fueling station would be, even though it was not our project. But we felt it was incumbent upon us, the First Aid Squad, to say to everybody, we know the town's going to do this and we think you should know about it. So we tried to make sure everyone knew about it ahead of time, but of course we were not involved in the detail of the design of that, so we did not know about the canopy either, so I don't want anyone to think that the canopy or the fueling station has any direct tie to the squad. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak as part of the public hearing? And if not, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Ms. Krummeler?
First, I want to talk about the canopy. I've come to think that that canopy is a mistake, and I think we should take it down. And then if we could store it and consider when the building is built, again, would it really look okay with the building? But I don't think it will. So I'd like to just propose that we take, since it's not, I thought it was a requirement for environmental reasons. Since it's not, I would like to just take it down. Because I've come to really think it's a mistake. Whenever I drive by it, I feel pretty bad about it. So I just wanted to see if other members felt the same way.
I mean, I think that I feel the same way you do, and I think that what's in the past has sort of brought us to this point, so we can't go back and change the past, but I do think we do need a better process going forward, and I think council needs to see drawings of this, and I think the neighbors need to see drawings of this, because I think we're also talking in a vacuum, and because it's a municipal project, it doesn't go through this, it doesn't need to legally go through the same process as PFARS is going through and as a regular development would go through. And I think that's part of what, especially for like, even Dwayne, well, Dwayne, you've been on the planning board, but it's just, I think that's part of what has caused some of the issues here, is that this was not considered a normal project, and so was being done just through state contract and just as sort of like an administrative process. And there was never decisions made about it, where I think it should have, given that it wasn't just moving of the fuel tank. This is a new, pretty visible, very visible construction project. So I think starting today, I think we need to sort of take a
Yeah.
pause and have drawings so we can comment on them.
But the current one, I mean, I think what you're pointing out even more strongly is that it was a mistake, because you're right, like nobody saw it. I don't know how that canopy even got. I mean, the rest of the PFARS building went through a whole process, and everyone saw the plans, but no, I don't even know who saw the plans for this.
Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, I feel like the hour is getting a little bit late, and I think that these design questions about the canopy really don't have too much to do with the ordinance that we're considering tonight. I think that there will be solutions. I tend to favor a solution that keeps a canopy because I think there are environmental reasons for it. As Mr. DeShield mentioned, we know that there are spills at fueling stations unavoidably, and if you've got spills and the rain just falls on the spilled gas on the ground, it gets into the groundwater, and it's a negative thing. It makes it harder to control. So I would like to see a solution that has some kind of canopy, but one that's much more attractive.
Well, so I agree with you. So we could put a different canopy on it later.
For sure.
But I think, to David's point, I think we might want to focus on the traffic issues at this point and on the ordinance itself. But I think hopefully we've made the point where I think we need to do some design review on this.
And then I would like to ask a question relating to the traffic. We've been having so much difficulty with DOT getting the simplest, most reasonable requests processed. Worst case scenario, we don't get to improve the intersection at Cherry Hill and 206. We don't get a left turn on Valley and 206. I'm wondering if we want to give away the possibility of at some point reopening Terhune, worst case scenario. And so what we're doing tonight is transferring ownership to PFARS. And the question is, what's the downside for PFARS of holding off on transferring ownership until we know that we have some kind of reasonable solution to the traffic?
I want to let Mark answer that, and then...
I second that question.
Okay, so that's not a question I ever contemplated coming to tonight's meeting, to be honest. But if you looked at the approved plans that SPRAB and the zoning board had reviewed in excruciating detail, pretty much the parking lot for the squad is where Terhune Road is. So the building ends probably 10 feet, 8 feet from the edge of Terhune. So to say to the squad at this point, you have a $7 million building that you will not have a parking lot for and you cannot park at, would be a huge problem. There's all sort of DEP and other environmental approvals that have been given with the expectation that how that upper site is developed and mitigated, and what's done with Terhune Road was all taken into effect. So I don't know that you can just walk away from those kind of approvals. But I think to say to the Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad that's providing 911 emergency ambulance and rescue services to this community since 1939, and in a building that was built in 1963 and is woefully inadequate, that, oh, by the way, even though you are providing emergency services like 3,000 times a year to this community, and this plan's been already approved, because we can't get our act together on the traffic, we're going to halt your project. That makes no sense. And I say that as president of the squad and as a taxpayer and a lifelong resident.
Can I speak to that as well? I think Mr. Frieda's point is a good one. I think that the PFARS construction has gone forward. There's a memorandum of understanding. Whether or not it should have been approved and done this way. We cannot pull that out. I mean, to contemplate that at this point when they're in the middle of construction, having raised money and made all these assumptions, it just doesn't make sense. So I'd like to, and this may be wholly inadequate, since we're having so much trouble with DOT, what can we do to improve that intersection? Like getting a crossing guard there, let's advocate for that. I don't know who we have to reach out to the schools. Let's think about what we can do in property that's under our control and intersections that are under our control, not under state control, to mitigate some of these potential hazards while we work with the state. Mark, do you have a solution?
I would like to suggest that there are alternatives you could look at immediately. So DOT, when they said they were going to fund the improvements to Cherry Hill and 206, they were going to put 5 lanes on the east side of 206, so on the little part of Mount Lucas there. So you'd have a right turn lane, a lane to go straight across and go up Cherry Hill, and a lane to turn left onto 206, plus 2 lanes coming onto Mount Lucas from 206, 1 lane to make a left to go up Mount Lucas, and the other lane to make a right onto Mount Lucas. And we only needed to widen, or they only needed to widen that little part of Mount Lucas by like 10 or 12 feet to get the 5th lane. So the width for the 4 lanes probably exists today. We could look at putting 4 lanes there, right, which means add the left turn lane going towards, as if you're going towards Cherry Hill. I just want to make sure you understand where I'm saying. So you can make the left and just have 1 lane coming from 206 onto Mount Lucas towards, Mount Lucas Witherspoon. So that could probably work. The other thing to relieve the congestion would be, as you come at Mount Lucas and try to make that left to the traffic light, if we were to make that 3 lanes there, and the road's probably wide enough, so you had a right-hand lane to let you go up Mount Lucas, because half the people don't pull their car over to the left anyway, so you could have 3 lanes there. A lane to come in and 2 lanes, 1 lane to go up Mount Lucas and 1 lane to go to the traffic light. Those could be temporary steps that might help with some of the problem. I'm not saying that resolves the problem, but we should look at that and see if that helps.
Ms. Stockton?
So we have a lot of ideas that are in the works for consideration. Just to step back a few steps is, yes, DOT committed to making changes at the Cherry Hill intersection back in 2016. When they came out in 2018 to start the process to be able to make those improvements, they said that, we're not doing anything on that short piece of Cherry Hill. That was always the idea that we had from DOT, is that they would make those improvements like Mr. Frieda talked about between Mount Lucas and 206. So that was one change. And then when they were out there, they realized, we can't actually build what we designed in 2016. We don't have the right-of-way to do that. So I think I had mentioned this when the ordinance was introduced a few weeks ago. That put us back a few steps, and they offered, we'll give you the traffic signal, and you can do whatever you want. So, I mean, we're working through the process. I mean, we're looking at temporary signal timing change at Cherry Hill and 206. We're looking at painting a do not block the box in the Cherry Hill Mount Lucas intersection. Maybe we can change the signal timing on Witherspoon and Valley intersection. Future ideas that we're looking at, just to put them in your brains, are if you're coming into town on Cherry Hill from Cherry Valley, do you prohibit the left after you've gone through the traffic signal? Do you prohibit the left to go north on Mount Lucas? Do you instead make all of those lefts at 206 and go up to Jefferson? We're trying to look at every option, and we're also, again, cognizant that we do have that pedestrian loading. And so to put 5 lanes into that area of Cherry Hill for 2 to 3 hours, 5 days a week, do we want to have that in that location? So we're trying to take steps. Everything we do that touches 206, even if it's adding in that 3rd or 4th lane, needs a DOT permit, and it's a major permit, and you have to have your traffic counts and you have to have your traffic studies. As I said before, the data that we had has expired by the time we had gotten to this point with DOT and them figuring out that what they had proposed doesn't work. So we are working through it. We'll have a schedule at the meeting next week to know what we're looking at further ahead. I mean, another outside the box idea is, do you put a traffic signal at Ewing Street? So if people are trying to go from Cherry Valley Road to get themselves through Valley Road to Harrison Street to Route 1, is it more appropriate for them to stay on Ewing Street instead of taking some of the more residential roads? So all of these are under consideration. We welcome more ideas, anything outside the box. But again, anything that hits 206 requires a permit from them. The idea of changing that striping on Mount Lucas between Valley and Witherspoon, Valley and Cherry Hill, we have looked at that out in the field. We have some safety concerns, so it has to be paired with a few other things, and that's why we don't want to do one thing that has unintended consequences without figuring out what next steps are. So that's what we're working through, but it sounds like we may want to consider asking DOT ahead of time of, is there a possibility of adding more green time on the Cherry Hill crossing to alleviate a little bit of that backup? And we can look at our own traffic signal as well. Go ahead.
I just want to make one comment just so that, just to remind council, and one of the issues back in 2014, council entered a memorandum of understanding with the Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad, which laid out all the things that we are required to do. Part of that is the vacation of Tarrant Road.
But does it require specific timing?
Can I just say one thing, though? Like, the First Aid and Rescue Squad, we all rely on. And I don't want any of the things that I've said before to suggest in any way that I don't support them having the facilities that they need. But at the same time, Eve, when you say, we made a commitment to them and we have to follow it, you also made a commitment to the residents before you even approved this variance that you were committed to fixing that neighborhood in terms of the traffic pattern and looking at it and coming up with a better solution to what was already bad. And you've now not solved it, made it worse through a later commitment that you've made to somebody else. And so I don't want the First Aid and Rescue Squad not to have a parking lot. I understand how crucial that is. And I think they will get one. But all I'm saying is please don't vacate it until you've fixed it and come up with a better plan. Don't take it out of the equation. They may have to figure out parking at the municipal lot or at Valley lot or somewhere else if the timing is off. But I think I just want you to feel the pressure to please fix this before vacating Terhune, and maybe by not passing it tonight, First Aid and Rescue Squad will get on board as well in supporting us to really pressure the state to come up with a better, support us in having a solution.
Okay, thank you. I had a question for Ms. Stockton, which is what your best guess was for the timing for being able to put in real improvements at that intersection? Like best case scenario, likely scenario?
It's hard to say because we don't know what the options are going to be. DOT permits can take 3 to 6 months. And we have the lead up to that point with gathering the data, getting the options approved, then preparing the documents to submit. The goal has always been to look at short-term improvements, and we will always endeavor to do that, whether it's moving lane striping or whatever it is we can do. So I think best case scenario is this fall of having something that we could go out to bid with and find a contractor to build. What if it's done by DOT's forces? I don't know. I don't know how long that would take.
Well, I was just wondering if the DOT could make an exception for construction, because that must happen a lot where there's construction that's affecting their roads, and so you put up cones and do things. There's no
You get permits for everything.
Permits for
We have permits for the work that's out there now. Even putting a sign on the state highway that is not their sign, we need permits for.
Mayor, if I can just quickly regress on something, and I agree with Councilman Cohen that the whole canopy issue is not part of the ordinance tonight. But I just wanted to propose that I liked what we did with the food waste program, where we just convened like a public meeting, and folks, stakeholders got a chance to come and have like a nice charrette and try to figure out possible solutions. I was just wondering if that may be a possible way to deal with this issue. We have great designers in town. Not the issue of, like I said, not the ordinance itself, but on the canopy issue. We have great designers in town. Of course, there's the environmental impact side of it. So it's not just an aesthetic issue. This is also an environmental issue. I'm just wondering if it would make sense to maybe schedule some sort of public meeting where all the stakeholders can come in and come with different ideas, and we can weigh them against things that are necessary versus things that are aesthetic, as we talk about the gateway, the northern gateway into Princeton.
Yeah, I think as a first step, we want to have the neighborhood meeting, and hopefully we'll have some sketches for that meeting, and then I think we can talk about, I think we want to have something that we want to make sure that the drawings that are presented are ones that can be built, and we have, we know what the budget is and everything else. So I don't want to promise something that might not be possible, but I like the idea of where you're going, where I think there just needs to be a more focused design sense on what gets built there. So I think we'll work on the exact process of what that will be. It's a little late, so I want to just sort of focus on the...
Can I just ask a follow-up question specifically pertaining to the ordinance? At this point, Terhune Road is closed due to construction. Mr. Frieda, can I just ask you, how long that has to remain closed? Let's say that you didn't need Terhune in the long run. How long would it be need to be closed due to construction? Rough estimate.
There's stormwater work and everything that still needs to happen. There's a rain garden right next to your fueling station that's required by DEP. That has to connect to the stormwater system that goes across Terhune and down Mount Lucas and to Valley. There's other inlet structures along 206 that some of them are already put in. All that piping needs to be put in place. Look, you have a legal agreement with the squad that says you're going to vacate Terhune Road. You need to vacate Terhune.
The point that's not, I'm sorry if that was confusing. What I'm saying is that even if, I agree with you, we made an agreement with you and we have to stand by that agreement. But I guess the point I'm making to the community at large is that even if that wasn't the case, and I know I'm talking theoreticals here, that Terhune is going to be closed for a lengthy period of time anyway, even if you were not ultimately keeping it closed for the long run. So that no matter what happens, we need some kind of short-term solution that really has nothing to do with this ordinance.
Right.
That's the
It's
point.
not like the road can be opened in a week. That's true.
I mean, I assume it would be many months, but...
Yes.
So... Right. So
structural steel has to be delivered to the site. That's the only area you have to stage anything. Everything that needs to be brought to that site at this point is going to go through that piece of Terhune Road. So,
So,
you have
yes,
months and
I'm
months
just,
of
I'm
work.
just looking for support for it, but my understanding that this is not something that you can sort of say, oh, sure, let's open it tomorrow in a short-term way. We need a solution that it does not involve that piece of road.
Yes.
Thank
You're
you.
absolutely correct.
Thank you.
I was wondering about traffic. Do we have, I mean, would it help to have someone directing traffic and during those hours? I know that would really be probably a big expense on the part of the town, but when you were talking about,
I think
crossing
right-
guards can't direct traffic as far as I understand.
I think that the police are stretched right now, but we did have a meeting with the schools, hoping that they will help us in providing candidates to be crossing guards. But right now, the police are covering a lot of those posts.
I'm talking about actually directing traffic to help with the traffic jam in the morning. Because
Yeah,
I don't thi-
exactly, but you have to move a police officer there to
Right,
do that.
okay, right.
And the police officers are covering the crosswalks, right? Okay, so I want to bring it back to the matter at hand, which is the conveyance of, or vacating a portion of Terhune right-of-way to the First Aid and Rescue Squad.
I'd like to make it to introduce the ordinance.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Kremler. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We're not introducing, are we?
I'm sorry, to approve.
Okay, to approve,
So
sorry.
it's been approved by Ms. Kremler and seconded by Mr. Quinn?
Correct.
And I think we've heard tonight from the neighbors that there are still a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and we hear the pressure of those issues. But it's also true that we have a contract with PFARS to approve this, and it's important that, in my opinion, it's important that when we sign a contract, we uphold that contract. So with that, Madam
I
Clerk,
agree with
please
that.
call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
I'm going to take a moment to explain why I'm going to vote no, which is that at this point, I would not put anything past New Jersey DOT, and there's nothing in our agreement that stipulates time frame for us to transfer this right-of-way to PFARS. My sincere hope and desire is that we'll be able to do that at such time as we have a solution to the rest of our traffic woes, but I cannot vote in favor of this until we have a solution in place for the rest of our traffic woes, so I'm going to vote no.
Ms. Crum-Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
Okay, the ordinance passes 5-1, and we will be scheduling a neighborhood meeting. We will be meeting with DOT, and we'll report back on that. And again, welcome community's help in contacting DOT independently about how important this intersection, this left turn signal is for the town of Princeton. Okay, next is ordinance 2019-13, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton concerning fire lanes, fire hydrants, and local enforcement of the Uniform Fire Code, and amending Chapter 14 of the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller.
I'm sorry, I had a question. on
I'm
that.
sorry, we had to open up the public hearing on this.
Well,
This
public first.
ordinance is, this pertains to the administration part of the fire code, and it's part of the consolidation and cleanup. So are there any questions about this ordinance? And if not, I'll open up the public hearing on it. Is there anybody who'd like to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question. Do we do public
Go ahead.
hearing first?
No,
or-
no, go ahead with your
okay.
question.
So I may have misunderstood this. So under section 14, I think it's now renumbered as 13, fees for inspection of uses not classified as life hazard uses, and fees for inspections of multiple dwellings. It says the maximum fee for a single owner for apartment dwellings is $500, and I didn't understand if that was a fee for the common space or a fee for the inspection of the actual dwellings, because if it's for the dwellings, a maximum of $500 when Avalon Bay has 280 units seems, I mean, I don't even know the right adjective. I mean, so ridiculously low. On the other hand, if it's for common spaces in the building, it seems reasonable, and I really didn't understand that portion.
You're correct. It is for common spaces in the building, not the dwelling
Okay.
units.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? All right, I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. Assuming Dawn doesn't want to say anything, I'll close the public hearing on this ordinance. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
I need a second.
Second. So I think it's moved by Ms. Krumler, wasn't it
Right,
already,
but
and
who
seconded by
seconded?
Mr. Quinn.
I didn't hear that.
Oh,
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
oh, maybe I was thinking of all.
Me too, I know.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Krumiller,
Yes.
Mr. Quinn,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson.
Yes.
Okay, the ordinance passes unanimously. Next, we come to ordinance introductions. Ordinance 2019-14, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton concerning sidewalk cafes and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, and the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And this is an ordinance we worked on quite a few months ago to make it easier for certain restaurants to have outdoor dining on the sidewalk. And we've now gotten clearance from, essentially, more or less clearance from ABC to move forward with it. So are there any questions from council, or is there a motion to approve?
I have a question about this one, too.
You do? Okay, go ahead.
So just clarifying, it sounds like at a sidewalk cafe, you can consume wine and beer, but not a mixed drink? Or is that only covered BYOB, or just?
Yeah, I think that's referring to BYOB, which is limited to wine and beer.
Okay. So if a restaurant had a liquor license that allowed them to serve a mixed
Yeah,
drink?
and that's going to be, yeah, because that's regulated separately. What this ordinance is just dealing with.
With the
is-
BYOB.
Yeah, for premises that aren't subject to liquor licenses from the state.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions, or is there a motion to introduce?
I'll move.
Moved by Ms. Fraga. Seconded by Ms. Krumiller. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Krumiller,
Yes.
Mr. Quinn,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson.
Yes.
And the ordinance was introduced, and the public hearing will be on April 8th, 2019. And have you already dealt with the second ordinance introduction?
We
here?
did, so, the second ordinance is actually not needed because the revisions that it incorporates were just made as amendments to ordinance 2019-10.
Okay.
So I would request that that be pulled from the agenda.
Do we need to officially pull it, or we just don't act on it?
Don't act on it.
Okay.
A lack of motion will definitely kill it.
Pretend it never
Okay.
existed.
Okay, so next we come to resolutions. The first is 19-104, resolution approving council's 2019 goals and priorities. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Cohen.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any discussion on these goals? I know it's late at night, so I encourage everybody to take another look at them, and I'll put together the council agenda schedules. And this is a living, breathing document anyway, so there'll be additions, I'm sure, and probably some changes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, we come to Resolution 19-105, resolution authorizing a construction contract with Top Line Construction Corporation in the not-to-exceed amount of $39,006.90 for the construction of curbing and other incidental work for the closure of Terhune Road and along the U.S. Route 206 frontage of the new Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad site. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Quinn.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Kremler. Any discussion or questions on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Thanks, Mark. And next we come to the last two resolutions will have to do with mowing services and turf management, 19106, 19107, and 19108.
I'd like to move them all.
Moved by Ms. Kremler, seconded by Mr. Quinn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolutions passed unanimously. Next, we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by a single vote. Are there any items on the consent agenda anyone would like removed? And if not, is there a motion to pass the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Quinn.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes. And now is there a motion to
So
adjourn?
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.